Okay, I think we'll get going here. This is our Wednesday, July 13th, 2016 Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board of Directors meeting. And can we call the roll, please?
Chair Sinks.
Here?
Director Bruins.
Here.
Director Harpootlian.
Here.
Director Craig.
Here.
Director Tate.
Here.
Director McAllister.
Here.
Director Simidian.
Here.
Alternate Director Lowe.
Here.
Alternate Director Martin Milius.
Here.
Director Gibbons.
Here.
Director Harney.
Present.
And Vice Chair Rennie is currently absent.
Thank you. So at this point, we will ask for public comment on matters not on the agenda. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on matters not on the agenda this evening? Do I see anybody? Wow, that's a first for a meeting in Cupertino. And by the way, I'd like to welcome you all to our council chamber. Glad we're fitting around and staff's here, so this is cozy, but it certainly works. So thanks for coming to Cupertino tonight. With that, I will close public comment and move on to the consent calendar. We have items 1A and 1B. Can I have a motion on the consent calendar?
Second.
Okay, any discussion, public comment? If not, we can vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Fine, thank you. That is unanimous, and we'll move on to our regular calendar where we have our executive committee report.
More than happy to give the executive committee report, Mr. Chairman. We've met, and we had a number of items on the agenda. One was to decide on the meeting time and date, and we've selected the fourth Wednesday of every month between 2 and 4. In the next two meetings, though, we're going to stay with the dates that we have selected already, and the executive committee members are already aware of that. We also picked a chair and vice chair, which is the same people that are chairing and vice chairing this board. We've talked about a criteria for a place that we want to move, for the offices that we want to go out there and lease to be the headquarters for Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and the criteria was accepted by the executive committee, and staff will be starting this Friday, going out there and looking for an office in order to, if we start leasing that office in the next month or so, most likely we'll be in somewhere between 4 to 6 months from now, I'm told. It takes that much time in order to prep the place up. So we're hoping that sometime in November or December we'll be in our new offices. We also discussed a number of things related to HR, human resources. The first one was looking at job classifications, and we shared a number of them with the committee, and they've accepted it. And we also looked at the benefit package, among the other things that we discussed. And a number of them looked fine, but we were directed by the executive committee to go and seek a company that provides these insurance and HR services, and have them help us kind of define what the benefit package should look like. So we have been working in the last couple of weeks on doing exactly that. And we're going to be contracting with one company that will be doing a compensation survey and benefits package survey, and will help us find an outfit that will take on all the HR activities that we need to take on early on. I think that summarizes most of the items on the executive committee, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Was anybody who was present at the meeting care to add anything? If not, we'll move on to item 3, the CEO report.
I have 4 items to share with you today. First, kudos and shout out to Mountain View. They've taken action to be the first city that will buy 100% of their power for their facilities from Silicon Valley Clean Energy. That will be 100% carbon-free, or I think it's a little bit more than that. It's more defined as renewable resources, not just carbon-free. So kudos to Director McAllister, as well as the group that sits behind me here from Mountain View, because I know that they had a role to play in making this happen. Second item I wanted to report on, and I think I've already spoken about it. It was the headquarters, and I already talked about that. The third is, if you do recall, last meeting, we brought to you a number of policy recommendations, and one of the policy recommendation was to hold off for a little bit to decide on what the mix of resources that we're going to buy look like. And you were gracious enough to give us a month to look at that. And also, one of the things that were requested of us is to submit a paper or share with you a paper that will explain the different type of resources, especially renewable resources available out there, what the differences between those resources are. And that paper is in your packet. It's 2 pages or 3 pages. It's really a good one. If there are 1 or 2 things that I want you to get out of that is that there are no such thing as bad renewables or good renewables. All renewable resources are the same. And for every 1 megawatt hour of a renewable resource that gets put out there or put into the system on the Western grid, which includes 14 different states, along with 2 provinces of Canada and parts of Mexico, for every 1 megawatt hour that a renewable resource is put into that system, 1 megawatt hour of a resource that generates power using natural gas is taken out. And it doesn't matter whether that 1 megawatt hour is happening in Idaho using wind resources, or down in Imperial Valley using geothermal, or here using solar. It's always going to be the same. Every 1 megawatt hour goes into the system of renewable resource. 1 megawatt hour of carbon-based resource is being taken out. That's the only thing that I would like you to remember. And I believe that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Very good.
Oh, I apologize. This is 1 more item. Melody just reminded me. I know that probably the last statement that I made may have caused some eyebrows to go up, and but in order to deal with that, I think it's very important for the board to work with us on putting together a workshop that will be for a number of hours, so we can explain how this system operates, because the electric system is a very complicated one, and the people that operate it, and the people that contract in it, and the people that handle the politics of it, sometimes operate in different worlds that don't interact very well. And I think it's very important for us to all get together and talk about how these worlds differ, and also talk about some of the things that we need to do when we go out there and begin buying electricity. What are some of the things and some of the approaches that we want to take. I'm going to try to schedule that meeting on a Saturday. I hope that you all be okay with that, since I know some of you work during the week. It should be about an 8-hour minimum workshop, and I will invite all 24 the directors as well as the alternates. I hope you all can make it, and I'll make sure that we'll pick a day that we can get as many of the directors as we possibly can, and I'll be spending some time with PEA to put together the agenda for that workshop. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions.
Very good. Are there questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director. It was very interesting. I appreciated that you just said this is very complicated, because I have had to read this several times. So I will look forward to the session very much. So the only question I had, and the explanation of the energy sources and the bundling and so forth was very, very helpful. I will reread that one again, too. But could you just briefly explain what happened in another jurisdiction that caused a problem with the concept of bundling, and how we are not going to have that problem? Do you know what I'm referring to?
You said another jurisdiction?
Yes.
You mean one of the other
Yes.
CCAs?
Yes.
I'll be honest with you, all I've heard that they've got a lot of pushback from environmental communities. They also got some pushback from union folks that push pretty hard and have been for quite some time to see to it that any of these renewable resources that people buy into are located here in California. And to the extent that that's our goal, then so be it. And we're going to talk about that later on in a presentation after next. But I think that has been the issue of buying these unbundled renewable resources, because if you are allowed to buy as much as you want of the unbundled renewables, you are more likely to put a lot of money in the pocket of somebody who owns a wind farm somewhere out west, still on the Western system, still interconnected to the Western system, but it's not California, it's not even one of the neighboring states. And I think that is the concept that some people are having a tough time dealing with. I don't, because I'm thinking only about reducing greenhouse gas, and that's it. That's the only thing that I think about when I think about doing anything beyond what we are required to do by law. I hope that answers your question.
So I'm just thinking that as we go forward, we'll all end up being sensitive to this issue, and anytime you think we should get an update about any issues, we would appreciate that. And then the next item is that I did find much of the information included in this packet, particularly in the renewable energy product overview. Some of that could be posted on the webpage, maybe on a definitions and acronym page or some other thing like that. That could be an easy resource for the public as well as members of the board.
We certainly will do that. Misty is here, and I'm pretty sure she already took note.
I know it's a complex subject, and I mean, for my part, I think it's an excellent idea to provide a workshop. Maybe not everybody can attend, but for those who are feeling that reading through these packets with all this technical information and trying to make sense of, really getting to what our final objectives are, it helps, I think, a lot. It would help a lot for us to all get on the same page and receive what the primer in green energy, right?
Yes.
Anybody else? Question or comment? Joe?
Mr. Bashi, did I understand you to say that all renewables are created equal?
Yes.
I'll just go on the record as saying I'm not sure I share that view, and I'll let it go with that for now. Thank you.
I'm happy to address why you're having difficulty with it. Certainly, no, we'll keep it there then.
Not necessary. Thank you. I just didn't want my silence to be perceived as an agreement with the proposition that all renewables are created equally.
Okay.
They're created differently, for sure. Yes?
So you did a outreach to over at Google. I wonder if you can give us some update on how the outreaches are going, or will that be covered later on in our discussions tonight?
If you don't mind, I'll ask Misty to step up to the mic and share with you what we've done so far.
Hi.
Hi.
Did I mute it? Okay.
There you go.
Yes, we've had 3 community outreach meetings with our large business users, Google, NetApp, and Specialized down in Morgan Hill. And that was done over like about a 3-week period. Really great results there. We were able to talk one-on-one or in small groups with some of our large energy users. We gave them some, building upon the residential survey that's in your packet that we'll have a discussion about, building off some of those questions. We took some of those, modified it for our commercial users, and asked them some of the similar questions that we were asking the residential users, really trying to figure out what's important to them and what they want out of a CCE program, and how we can help them through the process and make sure that they understand what's happening. It was been really great turnout. After that, we're having some follow-up conversations with some of the large users that weren't able to attend, but at least we've now made a lot of connections with a lot of our large commercial energy users.
What is Google hesitant in any particular way? Are they willing to come on board, or are they by their own?
I can probably help with that.
Yeah.
They are 50% direct access, and they didn't seem to want to let go of that, so they want to hold on to the direct access. The other 50% is we're going to be providing that service.
We are?
We are. PG&E is providing it now. We will be the default provider, unless, of course, they decide to opt out.
Okay.
Good. More questions?
Yeah. Is there any likelihood that they would opt out?
I didn't see or get any signs or get any word from them that they will.
Okay, that was kind of my impression too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more discussion on item 3? Public input? If not, I've had a request to move up item 6 at this time before item 4 because our presenter needs to attend to some family business a little later. Is there any objection from the board to take item 6 first at this time? Thank you. Can we hear about the community survey?
Great. Thank you, chairs, thanks, and members of the board. I'd like to introduce Charles Hester. He's the Vice President of Godby Research. We hired Godby through our contract with the MIG to conduct our residential survey and our survey of residents. We found this information, and I'm sure all of you have seen the report in the packet. We found this information to be pretty valuable, and I'm definitely taking a look at it on how we can use it for our messaging and outreach to our residential customers. It's definitely helped me to understand our customer base a little bit more, and it's a good reminder on the messages and the information that kind of resonates with residential customers in our region. So now I'll turn it over to Charles, who will just give you a brief presentation on some of the key findings that are found in the report.
Thank you very much. As Misty said, I'm Charles Hester. I'm Vice President of Godby Research. I recognize many of you here tonight as our clients, both at the city and town level in the county, as well as the county level. I will keep this as brief as possible. I am prone to talking fast, so if I get going too fast, please stop me if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to take questions during the presentation or after the presentation based on the purview of the council. A little bit about the overview and research objectives as the first slide in the deck. Silicon Valley Clean Energy through MIG commissioned Godby Research to conduct a survey of residents in the 11 participating cities and towns, as well as the entirety of unincorporated Santa Clara County, with the following research objectives. 1, to determine the importance and perceived effort of addressing climate change in Santa Clara County, evaluating initial interest in the upcoming SVCE Community Choice Energy, or CCE program, and to assess interest in potential future options for the SVCE CCE program in terms of amount of renewable energy content, as well as any sort of price increase or savings, or perhaps paying roughly the same as residents are paying now using their current provider. Methodology was a hybrid methodology. For those of us that have you that have worked with us recently, we've gone to a hybrid internet and telephone survey process because telephone's dying. It's dying in all formats, whether it's a cell phone or a landline, and we do much better, although I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. The universe for the survey was the adult resident population of the service area for SVCE, so if non-member agencies were not included, and this includes 459,044 adult residents, although we did use the voter file for our survey process, one, because it's the easiest way to get people by geography or area of residence so that we aren't including people from unincorporated areas that think they live in a given community, or perhaps are including cities or towns that are not part of this process. It's really the best way to get to folks, as well as it is the best repository, at least that I know, of email addresses and cell phone numbers for any sort of sampling source that we might use. Fielding dates were May 29th through June 12th, a little bit longer than I would have liked to see this field, but it was a very busy Democratic presidential primary that I don't think we all expected. Looking back maybe 6 to 9 months, I think everybody thought it would be wrapped up. However, there was a lot of noise from both the Clinton and Sanders campaigns that we had to deal with. The average interview length was 18 minutes. Our sample size was 601. The interview breakdown was internet 46 interviews, cell phones 197, and landlines 359. The internet response is a little bit curious to me, and I have to chalk it up to the newness of this agency. For many of your cities and towns, including Los Altos Hills and Saratoga and Morgan Hill and Campbell, where we have done recent surveys, we've done about, let's say, 30 to 40% of our interviews via the internet, but I would argue that your respective agencies are much better known than Silicon Valley Clean Energy, given the newness of the agency and as well as the name change. And the margin of error for the survey was 3.99% at the 95% confidence level, which means that if we did this survey 100 times, we'd be 95% confident that the errors or the changes in the survey would not eclipse more than plus or minus 4%. I did want to talk about the sampling design for this. This is a little bit of a complicated sampling design. What we did here is we took all the agencies, regardless of population size, and given that we had a budget that had us do 600 interviews, we divided that up as best we could into 50 interviews per agency. Say for Monte Sereno, the very small population in that community allowed us to do, I believe it was 19 total interviews. And then we weighted that data back to the natural population size of each agency for the county. So Cupertino was weighted to its percentage of the population of the larger SVC service area, the unincorporated areas, Campbell, Saratoga, Mountain View, and the other member agencies. This is typical for how we would do a survey like this, so that one, everybody's represented by their natural population distribution. However, we do have enough interviews in each member agency to be able to look at each member agency in the cross-tabulation data with an acceptable margin of error. So that's why we actually did it the way that we did our sampling. So the first slide that we're talking about was actually question 2 from the survey, and familiarity with the term climate change. As we can see, more than 9 in 10 residents are familiar with the term. Very high awareness in the SVC service area of the term climate change. This will start to tell a story as we move through the slides. The next slide is opinion on whether addressing climate change is important in Santa Clara County. And if you look at the slide for this, there's a sample size of 562. So anybody that answered yes to the previous question, that they were aware of climate change, the term climate change, got this question. We obviously did not ask this question of folks that said that they were unaware of climate change or don't know or not sure or things along those lines. If we look at the importance on whether addressing climate change is an issue in Santa Clara County, about 9 in 10 residents think that climate change is either somewhat important or very important, with 6 in 10 residents indicating that climate change and addressing climate change is very important. Conversely, about 1 in 10% of residents said that it was either somewhat important or not important at all. So clearly, as we're telling the story here, very high level of awareness of climate change, and it's an important issue to folks in Santa Clara County. Question 4 in the survey asked on a residents' perception if enough is being done to address climate change in Santa Clara County. Similar to question 2, question 3, this is anybody that answered yes to being aware of the term climate change. As we can see, about half of residents, or 47%, do not think that enough is being done to address climate change in Santa Clara County. About a little bit more than a quarter of residents think that enough is being done, and about a quarter of residents think that, don't have enough information to make an informed decision. It's an answer that they they don't know, there was no answer, or in the internet version of the survey, they indicated they're not sure. So as we're moving through this, high awareness of the term climate change, it's clearly an important issue to residents in Santa Clara County, or at least the SVCE service area portion of Santa Clara County, but there's low perception on if enough is being done. This is certainly a point for community education and outreach as we move through this, and we'll see that pricing not that great of a factor in terms of moving folks to this program or keeping folks in this program. However, the environmental benefits of this are certainly something to focus on in public education and outreach. The next question, question 5, asked unaided awareness of the term community choice energy or community choice aggregation. And unaided means that we did not give them any data on what the term means or put in any sort of context. We just asked if they knew what the term means. This is sort of the opposite of excuse me, climate change, very low in awareness, where we've got about 4 in 5 residents or 8 in 10 residents that say that they are unaware of the term community choice energy or community choice aggregation, and fewer than a fifth of residents indicating that they are aware of the term community choice energy or community choice aggregation. So in a nutshell, changing from CCE to SVCE seems to be a great move on the outset as a new agency, as you are. Next slide talks a little bit about implementation of green or household sustainable practices. Very high implementation at the household or personal level, sort of by ease of practice. So the more passive practices or easier, less expensive practices such as CFLs and monitoring your home energy use, buying an Energy Star certified appliance, having weather stripping, using a power cord or a programmable thermostat has a very high implementation in the county. Alternative or public transportation, use of public transportation is a little bit lower at 42%. Own or lease a hybrid electric or all fuel cell vehicles, about a quarter of residents, and about 1 in 5 residents indicate having a photovoltaic or rooftop solar system. Again, I think that the program that you guys are offering is a passive program. Folks will be automatically enrolled, at least from what I understand it. The billing would be much similar to how it is now. I would see that adoption of this over time to be, I would think it would be quite high, and even higher than the initial interest that we'll be getting to in the next couple of slides. So next question, in question 8 in the survey, awareness of the amount currently paid per month specifically for the electricity portion of an energy bill, given that the current provider in many instances provides both gas and electric. About 4 in 5 residents or more than 8 in 10 residents indicate awareness of how much they pay for a month. And as a sort of a check, I guess, in the survey, if we scroll back to the last slide where we asked folks in the implementation of household practices if they monitor their home energy bills for cost and usage, that was 83.2% versus the 85.5% as we sort of broke this thing out specifically as opposed to grouping it together with household or sustainable practices. So a good test there. Again, very high awareness of how much people are paying a month specifically for the electricity portion of their energy bill, both gas and electric. The next question has to do with opinion of reasonableness of cost for electricity services. So anybody in the previous question, and again, we've dropped down the sample size to 513 here, if you indicated an awareness of how much you pay a month in your electricity bill, you got this next question. And in looking at this, I was quite shocked by it. About 77% of residents, or a little bit more than 3/4, think that their bill is at least somewhat reasonable currently. So certainly price would not be a driving factor unless there's a lot of savings to move folks to clean energy, and the climate change aspect and environmental benefit aspect and things like that seem to be the way to go in terms of public education and outreach to the SVCE community. The other thing that I thought that a little bit surprising in this specific question was looking at the very unreasonable versus very reasonable, and it's almost 8 to 1 in terms of folks that think that their bill is very reasonable versus the folks that think that it's very unreasonable. So clearly electricity bills in Santa Clara County, even though the cost of living is astronomically high as it is in other portions of the Bay Area, the electricity bill is viewed as not being too expensive to residents of your county, or at least residents in the SVCE service area. The next slide is question 13. So some of the slides that we did skip that are in the report, given the length of the presentation, I'll just outline that we did test 4 options as part of this, and we started with the most onerous option in terms of a price increase and moved to the least onerous option in looking at this. So we tested 100% renewable energy at 10%. We tested 100% renewable energy at a 6% increase. We tested 75% renewable energy content at the same rate, and we tested up to 50% renewable energy content at about a 2 to 3% savings. This option here that you're looking at now, the willingness to participate at 75% renewable energy at no additional cost, was the most popular option, although the 50% option at 2 to 3% savings is statistically the same as this one. I believe it was 69% versus 67.4. However, with a 4% margin of error, I can't say that there's any statistical difference between those two. As a person who does a lot of pricing, I worked on Clean Power SF. I do a lot of research on recyclables and solid waste and renewable energy and stormwater and water pricing and things like that. I honestly think this is a great place to start. Your guys are at 2/3 for really asking about a brand new agency and the concept of what that agency wants to provide. It's not like they can go out and interact with it and then decide if they would like to keep it. You know, we're asking people in concept if they would support something like this, and I would think that having more than 2/3 support is a sort of a great start for where you are in the process of being an agency and rolling out your programs. The next slide is question 15. This is the likelihood of opting out based on automatic enrollment. And again, we've dropped down from the 601 sample size to 472. So these are the 472 folks that indicated an interest in any one of the options that we did. 100% for a 10% increase, 100% for a 6% increase, 75% at no cost increase, or up to 50% for 2 to 3% savings. A little bit surprising here with the 42% that are likely, somewhat likely or very likely to opt out and go back to their previous provider versus the 35% that would be unlikely here. However, what I'm looking at in this is the veracity of the support here. I'm looking at the somewhat unlikelies, the somewhat likelies, and the DK&A, which are about 75%. What this would tell me is that you're asking people if they would go back to something. They need more information to be able to make a decision on this. And not only do they need more information, it's my opinion that they need to actually interact with the service to ensure that they are receiving the value proposition that SVCE is outlining in terms of, am I getting the renewable energy content that was promised? Am I getting the savings, or in this case, the no price increase that I would promise? And probably just as important, is the billing and transition just as seamless as what has been promised in the survey outline that we provided people before we gave them these options? It is a little bit concerning. It is something that I would watch out for. However, I think that you could mitigate this significantly, again, by keeping the value proposition of SVCE in terms of the amount of renewable, the price, and then the seamless billing and transition from their current provider to SVCE. Yeah. The last slide that we're going to talk about tonight, these are the 129 folks that didn't want to, that were uninterested in any of the options that we presented. Again, the 100% at the 6 and 10% increase, the 75 at no increase, or the 50% at the 2 to 3% increase. And the takeaway that I have here is that these are really trust and reliability related issues as opposed to philosophical issues with climate change and clean energy is not a priority for me. If I sort of group these trust things together in terms of I need more information to make a decision. I trust my current energy provider. They're a legacy provider. They've been around for 100 years. Why wouldn't you trust them as long as the lights are on and you're paying what you paid last month? I don't believe what I would actually pay. I don't trust a government agency, or I do not think the service would be reliable. Again, I think the more that folks interact with this program, if this program follows the value proposition that's been outlined to the residents for the program, you again can take some of these folks that were not interested and get them to not opt out of the program and be supporters of the program, the more time that they've had to interact with it. And that's the end of the presentation. I welcome any questions.
Questions? And John?
Yeah, can you go to slide 7 for me, please? Mm-hmm. And on the very last one, the solar panels, is there any context to put that the we're at 18% on the solar panels in the area?
I don't have any context for that. I didn't do any sort of secondary research. I did, however, take a quick look at the demographics section, and I'm looking at own versus lease or rent, and greater than 2/3 of the folks that took this survey, so about just a little bit less than 70%, are owners. Obviously, the renters or the leasers, why would you put solar on something that you're renting or leasing? I would think that 18% or whatever for the 19% for the photovoltaic is actually a little bit low for the community, given the number of owners versus the number of leasers and renters that we had in the survey. I can't speak to to why that is, but I certainly don't have any sort of secondary data that tells me that X percentage of homes in Santa Clara County have rooftop solar.
Okay. And then on question number 13, why was there such a, were you able to dig down and why there was 24% no, even though it doesn't cost them anything, but it would allow them to receive 75% renewable energy?
Yes, if we go to slide 13 and question 16, these are really the reasons that folks outlined for not having an interest in.
So the 129 were the no people?
Yeah, they're the no
Okay.
people, but they're no to anything. So not only did they say no to the no increase, they said no to the up to 50 for 2 to 3% savings as well. And again, the thing that stands out here, aside from the trust-related stuff that I pointed out earlier, is that I need more information to make a decision. So we didn't ask the veracity of support for any of those options. Is that definitely yes or probably yes, the way that we would or have in past surveys, given the length of the survey and the need to keep it in the budget that we had. But I guess my takeaway would be that if we had asked that, the probabilities would have been a lot greater than the definitelys for the people that did support this, the more expensive it got, basically. So at 6%, if we broke that up, it might have been 50%, probably yes, and 50% definitely yes of the yes. The 75%, it might have been 75% definitely yes. It might have been 90% definitely yes at the cost savings. But we just didn't have the time in the survey to sort of to break out the veracity of support for any of the options. Just a yes, no.
Thank you.
Sure.
More questions? Emily?
Yes. Yes, I have a question. So when I look at question 13, there seems to be a very high percentage of people who are willing to participate at no additional cost at a 75% renewable energy level. So it seems to me as a pretty high percentage of willing. And yet, when I look at 15, the likelihood of opting out on the automatic enrollment plan, between the somewhat likely and very likely, it adds up to like 40%.
It's 42%, yes.
So I'm trying to see if whether or not it's the opt-out option that people are not comfortable with, because it seems like at one hand the number is very encouraging. Yeah. And then on the second question, the opt-out rate is pretty high. So I'm trying to see if there is any implications between the two questions, and whether or not it is just the idea of automatic enrollment that turns people off.
I think that there's certainly a concern with automatic enrollment for the folks that are very likely to opt out. I think I'm sort of conflating questions here between the folks that showed interest and the folks that didn't show interest. But if we had said, for the folks that did show interest, a similar question, well, what would be your biggest concern about this? I think that we would find out that they need more information, and I think that and the fact that they haven't really, you're asking them about a concept that they haven't interacted with yet, I think that is probably driving the opting out more than the fact that they have a problem with auto enrollment. And again, my hypothesis for that is the large percentage, almost 75% of folks that are either somewhat likely to opt out, somewhat unlikely to opt out, or the folks that just don't know. I think that they need more information, and I think they need time, again, to evaluate the program in terms of, is it giving me the renewable content at the price or at the same price that I'm paying now? And, is the billing just as seamless as it is now with my current provider?
Good. More questions? Liz?
Thank you. So just for general information, tying back to Director McAllister's question, I checked with the city of Campbell, and we have roughly 24,000, I'll get the number right, 24,000 residential units in the city. So it's a mixture of apartment and housing, about 50-50. So if we just say 12,000, we're issuing 240 solar panel permits per year.
Okay.
So it's very high. So other communities might want to check and see what their statistics are. It's easy to just check with the building department. So that was, I thought, of interest. Also, when staff was very kind, Misty was very kind in coming to the Campbell Chamber of Commerce just after our last board meeting. Very good presentation. After the meeting, I hung around, and it was very interesting. Although it was a mix of businesses at a chamber meeting, it was also residents commenting. And they very strongly commented that they wanted to know what was in it for them. That was their big question. You know, are you going to save me money? What is it? Why should I even do this? I wanted to know what, climate change and greenhouse gas was okay, but they still wanted to understand what it was for them. And I think we all have to be very sensitive to that. They were, the second most prominent comment I got was that they were uncomfortable with the automatic in and having to opt out. Just kind of a general observation from that experience. And then I was just curious, did you happen to do or know of a survey in Marin or Sonoma that preceded the implementation of a CCE?
You know, we do almost every survey in Marin County.
Except this one.
Yeah, except MERA, the emergency radio one that was on the ballot last year, and this one. I don't know who did the survey in Marin County.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was some parallel where it was on the same horizon line, particularly with Director Lowe's comment about that 40%, that 42%. I was a little nervous about that too. I appreciate the
I
explanation.
can look that up and direct that through staff.
That would be, I think,
to you.
I
guessing
would
it's a
appreciate
public
that. Thank you so
record,
much.
Given that it's a public agency, much like you are, so yes.
More questions? Daniel?
Yes, thank you. Just in regards to the demographics, I noticed that there's a second set of slides that represents the city area of residence of the participants. Can you talk a little bit about if there were any outliers in the different communities, whether it's by ethnicity or by income level? Was there any change in responses?
I'd have to dig through the crosstabs to look at that, but I can certainly do that as a follow-up as well. The one thing that does stick out in my mind is that folks on the lower end of the SES scale were the ones least likely to monitor their energy bills for how much it costs, basically. I thought that would be much higher, but it was actually lower and statistically significantly lower. But I'd have to go look and see if there were any outliers by ethnicity or income or anything like that. But I can certainly do that this week.
Yeah, also geographically, if there's more acceptance from north to south, or
Sure.
that'd be a good point to know. And then in regards to the reliability perception, did we test for that? Is there an issue with a concern that SVCE would have a reliability of electrical transmission?
We did not test for that. We tested the concept in general, and then we moved into the pricing and willingness to participate by renewable energy content questions. So we didn't test reliability or anything like that within the survey. No.
Okay, thank you.
Jeannie?
Yeah, two questions. One, I want to go back to the question in terms of opting out, and just wondering, in terms of, again, I don't know exactly how it was phrased, if it's phrased as we see here on the screen, but when you look at our day-to-day lives, opting out is something you all want to do because of protecting your privacy and such, and I'm just wondering whether or not psychologically in our minds, if asked a question about opting out, you're going to say, I'm likely to opt out because of your association with something that you're exposed to on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would be conflating the interest with the non-interested people in terms of the non-interested people wanted more information and they didn't believe in it. I think that if we looked at that, I think that those folks that, like I didn't get a choice and, there's no way I would ever support this, I think they're more likely represented in the 9.2% very likely as opposed to the 32.5% somewhat likely to opt out.
Okay. And the other question is, will we have access to some of the crosstabs and such, and particularly looking at it, as wearing our city hats and working on and looking at communication and what's going to happen as we work with the agency, getting some insights at a more local level?
Absolutely. The crosstabs are part of the packet that we provided to staff, and I believe that they provided that information as a separate appendice, given the size of it. I want to say it's 600 plus pages of crosstabs.
Wow.
But certainly we crosstabed every question by agency. So if you want to look at the results of every question by Campbell or Cupertino or Los Altos, then yes, that data is certainly possible. And that's really the reason that we did the disproportional sample and tried to get 50 interviews per area, and so that we could do that, but then weighted it back to the natural population size so that it's reflective of each of your agencies, given the larger service area.
Well, I feel good about this survey in terms of giving us enough insight so that we can start honing in and trying to figure out some of our messaging and such. So thank you.
Charles, I was wondering, I still have a home phone. I've long been on a do not call list. Now, both on my home phone and my cell phone, I'm getting unwanted calls from entities with which I do no business. And a lot of these calls are soliciting me to get the wonderful solar deal of the week. And I'm just wondering if there's been so much noise, and yes, it was campaign season. I'm wondering if you noticed in surveying some just total frustration with, why are you calling me about energy? I've gotten 20 calls in the last month. And was that a factor for you? Did you find an unusual amount of frustration with the voice on the other end?
It's always a factor, right? Nobody wants to be called for, whether it's for telemarketing or for a survey. We front load the introduction of the survey that this is, we're not selling you anything, and this is entirely about your opinions. And in this particular case, we're not asking you who you're going to vote for president. This is definitely about local issues facing Santa Clara County. But it is a challenge with our business. I mean, the reason that we've gone to the hybrid survey process is it's so incredibly difficult to get people on the phone, even when it's not campaign season, or even when there's not a big push from whatever solar company trying to sell more panels, or whoever's trying to sell whatever through telemarketing. It's a challenge we're facing as an industry, and at some point we're going to go all internet. We're just not there yet, but and it's really an age-related schism.
And you can't call cell phones because there could be
we
a
actually
charge.
can call cell phones.
Okay.
If we hand dial cell phones, we can call cell phones. You can't auto dial cell phones, and you can't use IVR. You have to use a live person, but you can call cell phones.
Oh.
And that's part of the reason of using the voter file, is because cell phones are so wonky in terms of it's not tied to a physical address, right? I have a cell phone from Half Moon Bay because our company was in Half Moon Bay 10 years ago. If you look that up, that's why we actually use the voter file, is because we can tie that cell phone to a specific address to make sure that we are including cell phones, we are including landlines, and we are including email addresses, so that we are having the broadest sample possible. So on the back end, we're not having to weight as extensively by age if we didn't include internet or cell phones or ethnicity or income level or whatever it is. It's really an attempt by us and our industry in general to make these surveys as accurate as possible without having to weight the data so extremely on the back end of the survey.
Understand. Thank you. More questions? Yeah.
How did you get the people to participate in the internet poll?
Sure. We took the SVCE email address, and with the executive director was fine, good enough for letting us use his name, and we created collaboratively an email address, and the voter file, much like cell phones, actually has email addresses for voters. And I want to say in this county it's probably a quarter to a third of voters, plus given that we've got somebody's name and address, we use a third-party matching system to hopefully increase that. And and we send out an email that looks very much like it's coming from SVCE, because that's the hardest thing for an email is a spam, is it a trusted source? So we need to use the svc.org email address so it looks like it's coming from that, so that folks, okay, this is coming from a real government agency and not some solar company trying to sell me something, or some spammer trying to drop malware on my computer or my device.
Okay. I was curious if you've considered in the near future using a system like Nextdoor. We've got about half of our population is now on Nextdoor, and whenever there's an important issue, there's plenty of people who will make noise about it. I wouldn't say it's totally scientific as close as you've done it, but it would be interesting to maybe factor some of that into the scientific one, to maybe just get a lot of raw emotional responses, because you will get those.
We did a survey in Saratoga where they had a process, or we did a survey, a statistically valid survey on the downtown and the downtown plan, and they also did a process through a different vendor that was similar to Nextdoor. My problem with those sort of processes, and they'll probably get better at being able to do this, is you can be a resident of Palo Alto and comment on the Saratoga Nextdoor website, and you can be somebody that's got 6 or 7 email addresses and sign up 6 or 7 times and sort of flood Nextdoor and those sorts of venues with your opinion that may not be reflective of the larger opinion of the community. And we see that happen more in our political work when we're looking at candidates and revenue measures and ballot measures and things like that. As those sort of platforms evolve, I would hope that they would put in mechanisms so that you have to put in an address or something like that, and only one person from that address can have an account or whatever, so that we can take some of that messing with the process out of the equation and use those sorts of platforms.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Sure.
Any more questions? Any public comment? Yeah, if you're welcome to come up to the microphone, and then we'll have you fill out a card after the fact.
Yes, Bruce Nagel from Mountain View. I guess it would be good to, you touched on this a little bit, is to understand more about how this kind of correlates to the rest of the CCEs that have been out there, because there are a number of them that are out there. And my assumption is this question, the questions that you're asking should be common to all of them. And the question of trust is something I've also seen come up in some isolated incidents. And if you had something to talk more about that, either now or at some point in the future, it'd be helpful.
Okay. Is there other public comment? Thank you. If not, I'll close public comment. Do you wish to respond?
No.
On trust, yeah. No. So, very good. If there's nothing else, we will move on then with our thanks for that great report to item 4, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Operating Plan and submittal to the CPUC.
Just a quick introduction, Mr. Chairman. This item is going to be presented by Pacific Energy Advisors. John is here to present it. This is the first step that we need to take in order to start serving our customers. There are a number of other steps that we need to take with outside agencies, like we need to sign a contract with PG&E, and we need to inform the California ISO, and a number of other steps that we need to take. But this is definitely the first one. CPUC have 90 days to not approve it, but certify that they have received this plan from us, and after that we can go ahead and proceed with the next step. So John, if you're around.
Thank you. Let's see, how would the best way be to... Okay, I'll sit here. Yeah. Thank you. I'm John DeLessi with Pacific Energy Advisors, and we've been working with Tom pretty hard the last few weeks in pulling together the draft implementation plan that's in the packet and that we're asking for your approval tonight. So I want to start off just and frame what is the implementation plan, what's its purpose, and I think it's important to keep in mind that fundamentally it is a regulatory requirement, and it is a document that's called out in legislation and that needs to be adopted before this agency can be actually certified to provide retail electric service and to actually be a registered community choice aggregator. The law calls out in broad strokes what the plan needs to contain, but there isn't a whole lot of detail, and so that detail has been filled in. We're fortunate now to have 4 or 5 implementation plans that have been developed and gone through the CPUC certification process. So there's a bit of a template that we're able to use now to tie the key requirements of the legislation to elements of the plan. Let's see, just want to make sure I'm on the right slide here. So what the plan is not...
So could I hold you for just a second? We're not seeing the slides on our screen, and I'm not sure we have this in our information that we've received before the meeting, but I don't know that the audience can see the slides.
I was in the same boat.
If you could just give us a moment to see if we can make that magic happen. Can anybody see anything on the screens left and right? Not either? Okay.
There's no light happened, you just turned it on right now, the laptop?
No, it was working previously.
It was working and it just stopped?
Did we lose a cord anywhere? Check your cords. John, do you do interpretive dance at all?
I do like soccer.
I don't know, if you had Google, it probably wouldn't have happened.
All laptops are not created equal, John.
Companies aren't either.
Yeah.
Did you like change your program at all?
People got up. They might have shuffled something.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, they go through Mountain View too, you know, so.
This communication guys just left.
Why don't we take a 5-minute recess? For those of you who want to use restrooms, there's men's and women's here, and we'll see if we can get this to work. I think the audience would appreciate following along with the presenter. So if my colleagues will indulge us, a 5-minute break, thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and-
desktop?
I'm sorry.
Sorry. What's going on here?
Yeah, I can go for it. Let's go through this.
Well, yeah, it looks like it, went to the screen. Yeah, it seems like it's like doing that. Let me go check,
That's a very strange number, 356, I don't know.
being upset about it or being sort of victimized by whatever's going on. It's harder to see when it's us because it doesn't seem like we're doing it to ourselves. It genuinely seems like, no, it's wrong, it's bad, it's not fair, it shouldn't be that way. But so much of it is a function of our minds and how we're relating to it. Because all of us, look, how many of you have had an experience in your life that at the time it happened, it seemed terrible, but in hindsight, you look back now and you go, oh, what a blessing. We've all had that happen. The challenge is being able to have that same relationship to things as they're happening. Why is this happening for me? Why is this happening for me? Even something mundane, some challenge of people won't open their doors, or how do I recruit people, or what about this, or what about that, or how do we communicate more effectively, or how do we deal with all the different things that are going on, from the big stuff to the small stuff. But if we start paying more attention to our mindset and how we're approaching things, that has everything to do with our ability to solve the problem. I'll give you one more example about this, and I'm going to have you talk to your partner. Because it can show up even on day-to-day stuff, simple stuff. Now, how many of you have ever been around a 2-year-old? Anybody been around a 2-year-old before? Okay, if you haven't been around a 2-year-old, it's a great experience, by the way. If you want to practice a lot of mental and emotional approaches to life, hang out with a 2-year-old because they're amazing teachers, right? Now, my wife, Michelle, and I have 2 girls who are now 9 and 7. But I had this funny thing happen. Michelle called me one day when Anna Rose, our youngest, was 2. And Michelle calls me on the phone laughing hysterically to tell me what had just happened. Now, she was with the girls, and at the time Samantha, my older daughter, was 4 and a half, Anna Rose was 2, and she was just trying to get them out of the house into the car to go to the store. Not a big deal, right? But if you've ever been around a 2-year-old, know sometimes something like that becomes a major production. Because at this point in Anna Rose's development, she decided she did not like her car seat. She didn't want to get in the car, so that was what was going on. So now her sister Samantha had gone through exactly the same thing around the same time, and we'd learned a few things, but still the easiest thing in the world to deal with. But so anyway, as soon as Anna Rose knew that we had to go anywhere, she'd start throwing a fit. I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to get in the car. There's this thing, something about the car seat was very upsetting to her. But anyway, Michelle was telling me the story, and what happened was she's trying to get the girls out the door, and Anna Rose, of course, does not want to go. You know, the whole bit, she's throwing a fit in the house. Now she finally gets them dressed, gets them all ready to go get them outside. And Anna Rose is now throwing a fit on the lawn, which is even worse now, out front on the lawn. Now all the neighbors, and oh my goodness, and this whole thing. And my wife, who's very calm and very composed, is now starting to lose it a little bit, but trying in public to kind of keep it together. Come on, let's get in the car. Finally gets her in the car, and now she won't get in the car seat. And she's on the floor of the car, right, arching her back and doing the whole thing. And 2-year-olds, as little as they are, unbelievably strong and willful at times, right? And here's Michelle, and she tells me, and this is in the middle of the summer, she's like, I'm dripping sweat, I'm trying, and I'm getting in the car seat, and the whole thing, right, and it's going on, and it's getting more escalated. Michelle said, I'm starting to lose it, I don't know what to do, I just start snapping the whole bit. Now, Samantha, on the other hand, is sitting in her little booster seat, all buckled in, very calm, just watching the whole thing happen, right? And again, she used to do the exact same thing at the time. Now, at this time, right around this time, in Samantha's development, one of the things that Michelle was working with her on, and me as well, was what to do in case of an emergency. So in the middle of this whole ordeal, as Michelle can't get Anna Rose into the car seat, the whole thing, Samantha very calmly says, Mommy, I can go inside and call 911. To which, of course, Michelle starts hysterically laughing. Laughing so much, she's like, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to like pee in my pants. I'm laughing so much, I'm not even paying attention. And the next thing, when I finally sort of gather myself, I turn around and look, and Anna Rose has climbed up, and she's now sitting in her car seat, waiting to be buckled in. And Michelle says to me, maybe my approach wasn't working so well. But that's often what we do, right? We get more frustrated and more frustrated and more frustrated, and the person or the situation or whatever we're frustrated with resists. And if we can actually just let go and shift our whole perspective, sometimes, not always, sometimes it kind of starts to resolve itself. And at the very least, our perspective is such that we can see other opportunities for how we might be able to address the situation. So here's what I'd like for you to do. Turn back to your partner. I know some of you were talking at the whole table, but if you can pair up, it's better just because talking to people about authenticity for many years. And what's interesting is I find that there's a lot of different understandings of what authenticity actually means. So when you hear the word authentic or think of authenticity, what does it mean to you? What comes to mind? The authentic. Original. What else? Honest. Tell the truth. What else? Genuine. Real. Not fake. Forthright. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I mean, it means all of those things and much more. But what's interesting is, again, sometimes I think we misconstrue what it means, particularly interpersonally. I remember I gave a speech, this was a number of years back, actually, right after my authenticity book came out. And after I got done with the speech, I get off stage, and I'm sort of walking around, and this woman comes up to me. She makes a beeline right over to me, and she gets right in my face, and she says, I'm authentic all the time. And I was like, okay. But she was like upset. I said, well, what's the problem? So I've lost some jobs because of that. I said, really? She said, yeah, not everybody can handle it. Now, at this point, right, I did not know this woman, but I was now getting a pretty strong sense of her personality, right? And I'm not sure what prompted me to ask her this somewhat provocative question, but I did. I looked her right in the eye and I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? And she was like, momentarily, a little stunned and probably a little offended. But I could kind of tell, or at least I was hoping, that based on her personality, she'd probably appreciate the banter and my sort of quick response back to her. And she says, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, all right, I appreciate the honesty, I appreciate the self-awareness. I said, but I don't know for sure. But if I had to guess, I bet it was the obnoxious that got you fired. Because we don't get fired or really have a major problem oftentimes by being too authentic. Because what authenticity is really about is realness, genuineness. Difficult, almost impossible to be too real. Now, we do get in trouble at times by the things that we do and say, clearly. So let's break this down. Because authenticity on the surface can seem pretty simple, but it's not as black and white as it seems. I always think of it on a continuum. On this side of the continuum is where we'll put phony, inauthentic. We all know what that looks like. We know what that feels like. You know what it's like to interact with someone else when they're being inauthentic, or at least it seems that they're being inauthentic, right? Difficult to trust, difficult to connect with, just challenging, off-putting, right? However, while it's easy, and we love to point fingers, don't we, at people being inauthentic? Especially these days. Oh, we love to point fingers at politicians. We love to point fingers at business leaders. He, she, celebrity, whoever it is, inauthentic.
Sometimes 60 days. We're starting to see more of these plans come in and the time that the CPUC takes to start to extend. So I think for planning purposes, we are assuming the full 90 days will be required. Following the certification, then there's a next step and final step, frankly, before you can start noticing customers and begin the enrollment process, would be registration. So that would include having a certified implementation plan, an executed service agreement with PG&E, and posting of the bond that is required, which is $100,000 presently. Once that package is assembled, you provide it to the CPUC. You're a registered community choice aggregator and are authorized to commence noticing and commence service. Just one point at the end, this is kind of a registration requirement. You wouldn't want to start noticing customers. In fact, it would be contrary to the tariffs and the rules if you were to start noticing customers before you had that registration, the implementation plan certified, and all the other registration requirements attended to. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about the details of the plan. This is just sort of a broad framework overview, but we can try to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions? Yes.
Not so much question exactly, but it's an interesting document, and it looks like it's pretty well hammered out, and I'm assuming that everything built on the foundations that were laid previously by other CCEs. And we seeing any greater pushback from CPUC or any of the other related hoops? Are they going up or down as?
No, we really haven't. You know, there has been some staff turnover, and so what we have seen, for instance, we put together the implementation plan that Peninsula Clean Energy submitted, and that's gone through the certification process. There were a few questions that we received, but...
Oh, is theirs already done?
Yeah, it is done.
Okay, great.
Yes. Yeah, but I wouldn't characterize it as pushback at all, as just clarifying questions.
Okay, so you're still thinking it's going to take the full 90 days? Did it take 90 days for them?
It took close to it. Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Are there any incremental submittals required if this information changes in some minor way, or there are updates? Do we have any, before we actually start operating and then thereafter, do we have an obligation to file amendments with the CPUC?
I can't really conceive of a scenario where that would be necessary, just because of the way that it's been drafted to allow for flexibility.
Right.
As I mentioned, you know, what clearly would require an update would be if the membership of the JPA were to change. That's specified in the rules. I can't really think of another reason why it would need to be updated, unless, you know, I mean, even if you change the phase-in schedule, it's clear that it's the board's discretion. The specifics about the timing around the launches of the various phases, even though the planned phase-in has been articulated in the document.
So is this our, other than for talking about advocacy on PCIA and other things, is this our one real interaction with the CPUC stipulated under state law, which enables us to do what we're doing?
It is, it's the first. It's the first and it's the primary. There are certain regulatory compliance activities that will be required. So as you go forward, for instance, you'll be required to prepare essentially a resource plan and provide that to the CPUC. There are also some other regulatory compliance filings that will need to be made once you're operational. But in regards to anything sort of that is required before you start, this would be it. This and then that registration document that I mentioned. It's not really a registration document, it's just posting the bond, providing the service agreement, the executed service agreement, and having the plan certified. That's the extent of the registration.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board? Joe.
Thank you. I have what will seem a perhaps slightly tangential issue, but since it is contained in the document, I'd like to address it, and I'm hoping that we can accommodate a modest amendment to the document. On page 39, there is a reference to customer confidentiality at the bottom of the page, and I think I certainly was pleased to see the indication of the consideration of confidentiality, customer privacy, confidentiality, so on and so forth. That, however, ties into the language on page 42, which indicates that the plan is to have a data management contract with a third-party vendor. And there's an argument as to why a third-party vendor makes sense, and I accept and agree with that argument, which is not our core competency, less expensive to let somebody else do it. Having raised the privacy and confidentiality issues, however, on page 39, I would like to suggest, unless staff has some reason why we cannot, that there be, that we explicitly call out with respect to the data management contract that any third-party provider will honor the commitments that are made on pages 39 and 40 under customer confidentiality, and will, as a precondition of any contract with this authority, also provide information that gives us some assurance that they've taken appropriate data security steps. This is consistent with the commitment that's made on page 39. It also, I think, should be an important value for a public entity like this, which is to respect the confidentiality and privacy of our constituents and our customers. But it also goes, colleagues, to the issue of our brand. One of the things we heard earlier during the presentation was people don't yet know who we are. Ultimately, they'll be making decisions based on their trust. One of the quickest ways for us to lose people's trust would be for a third-party vendor to compromise the privacy and confidentiality of the data, including by way of a data breach, but also by way of an intentional misuse of the information. So if being successful depends on our brand and the integrity associated with our brand, then it seems to me it's important that that integrity extend to the confidentiality and the security of the personal information that's contained in our records. So again, unless either Mr. DeLacy or our legal counsel suggests that there's some reason why we can't do that, I'd simply like to ask for an amendment with two parts on page 42, one indicating that the data management contract will require that the services are provided consistent with our customer confidentiality agreements on page 39 and 40, and that the third-party vendor, prior to a contract being awarded, provides adequate assurances in the judgment of our professional staff and our legal counsel as to the data security measures they have taken to protect the data.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion and it would be an improvement, and I don't have any concerns about including that in the plan.
I think we are almost ready for that. Does anybody else have comments or questions? Does anybody from the public want to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back here for a motion.
Move approval as amended.
And this is adoption of resolution number 2016-5.
It is.
Great, and we have your language captured, I believe?
Yes.
Excellent suggestion, Joe, thank you. So we will vote by voice, a voice vote?
Chair Spinks, could I just confirm the seconder of the motion, please? Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion is adopted unanimously. Thank you. Is anybody not here? Everybody's here. This is terrific. And now we're going to get to move to item 5, our power supply portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you recall,
Thank you, John.
Last month, we discussed a number of policies, and we left out how exactly we're going to divvy up our power mix between the different types of resources that are available to us tonight. That's exactly what we're going to be discussing with you. Just to start, generally, when you are planning to buy power supply, what you usually do is you look at your demand and you find the least cost supplies are most diverse, and you use those in order to meet your demand, and that's how we figure out what your cost is. What we have done is, because we know that we have certain requirements for renewable resources, is to do exactly that. We said we're going to get the minimum amount of renewable resources that we need to have in our portfolio, and the rest of the demand will be met by the least cost resources available in the market. And the first table that I'm going to share with you, actually it's a bar graph that you're looking at right now, describes, it's pretty much what the portfolio looks like. You can see that the cost is the highest. The cost of supplies is really the majority of our expenses. And if you add to it the operating expenses, the reserves, what you are left with is residual amount of money that is available to you to do whatever you want to do with it. So the question that we asked ourselves is, with that amount of money that we have left, which amounts to about, average about maybe $22, $23 million a year, what is it that we can do to get resources that are more carbon-free? Because the resources that we have, the least cost resources will have somewhere around 70% on year number 1 of carbon-based supplies, tapering down as we increase the requirements on renewable resources. So the question is, what if we want to try to get rid of that carbon-based resources and replace it with renewable resources or carbon-free resources? We have 5 options to do that, using 5 different designations of what a renewable portfolio or renewable resource looks like. The first one is to build resources right here in the valley. Mostly it's going to be solar. And these are utility size solar, not rooftops. Rooftops are considered to be a reduction of demand as far as the independent system operator is concerned. They only consider a resource if it's more than 1 megawatt. So we asked ourselves what would happen if we take that extra cash that we have and use it to build resources internally. And the results that you are seeing in this table describes how much of locally built resources that you can have of solar, which is the small green bar. After that, and that will consume pretty much all the $20 million or $22 million a year that we have a surplus. Then the rest of the resources that we have to buy will all be carbon-based. Basically, more than half will be that way. To be clear about it, even the notion of trying to next year to build local resources to meet our supply is not practical, because first, we don't have the credit, and 2, it takes time to build these things, and we need the supplies right away. So we are somewhat discounting this option, but not completely. The next option that we have is to buy renewable resources that are designated by legislation to be what they call bucket 1 resources, or resources that are renewable, placed in California or outside of California, but could be scheduled into the California system. That's what they designate as type 1. And we again asked, what if we use the surplus that we have to buy only type 1 resources? Type 1 resources in the market today have a premium cost of about $15 on the top of what the conventional resources cost. Conventional is running about $35, $40 a megawatt hour. You add to that another $15, and that will give you the type 1 resource. And if we are to use the surplus that we have to fill in with type 1 resources, as you can see from the bar graph that you have up there, there will be still a good portion that we need to still buy with a carbon-based type product. The next type of resource is, again, what they designate as bucket 2, which is a renewable resource that we can buy the credit from, then couple it with normal or system resources that we buy from California, either from the ISO or from any other supplier. And that is also identified as renewable resource. The premium for that is running at about $5 a megawatt hour today. And if we were to use only bucket 2, as you can see from the graph, we will be able to sort of clean up our entire portfolio and still have enough money left over that will range in maybe about $8 to $9 million a year. Again, that's after we put money in reserves, meet all the operating constraints, and buy all the resources that we need to meet our demand. Then the next option is the last type, which is bucket 3, which is the kind of seems to be the more toxic one from a political standpoint. This is the unbundled resource. Basically, you go to any supplier that's on the Western Connected System, and you buy from them RECs, or renewable energy certificates. Then you couple that with resources that are system-based here in California, and that will give you the also greenhouse gas free for the most part. that you can use and that is the least expensive one out in the market today. The premium for that is running somewhere around 50 cents to $1, I believe. And finally, the last option that we have is just to go out and buy a carbon-free resource that has not been acknowledged or recognized by the legislators at all, because they looked at large hydro, they found that there's too much of it in Northern California, and in order to come up with legislation that would be fair to both Southern and Northern California, they said large hydro is not going to count as a renewable resource. So we're taking that out of the equation. You can't use it at all to claim that you have a carbon-free resource. But then we are meeting.
You mean renewable or carbon-free?
I'm sorry, renewable. Yeah, as
Right.
the designable.
Okay.
Yeah, renewable is really the whole idea of having
It's
renewable.
not part of the RPS.
Yeah, it's not, exactly. And so we said since we met our obligation to the legislation already, now the question is, can we displace the energy that we are getting or we would have to get from carbon-based resource with hydro? What would the picture look like? Now, these resources today are running at about maybe $2 a premium over the conventional. And as you can see from the graphs, we would be able to clean up the entire portfolio and still have roughly around $16-17 million left over from that residual dollar amount that we have. All right, so that's basically just to show you the trade-off between the different types of renewable resources that we can use in order to move to a carbon-free supplier. Now, the two things that we wanted to discount early on when we thought, at least when I thought about, so what resources do we need to get for the next 2 years and maybe for the next 5 years? I've discounted two types. One is the local built, because it's obviously very expensive and it requires time, and that we don't have at this point. And the PCC3, even though it's the least expensive, but there's sufficient resistance to it, both on the legislative front, and I've sensed it from some of the folks here that this is not the kind of resource that they want to support. They'd rather support either the PCC1 or PCC2. Now, I'm not discounting either one for good. I am recommending to you that we set aside 1% of our revenue in order to support local programs, including local generation that will be 1 megawatt and above. And as soon as we accumulate enough in that, then we can ask the question, do we want to build resources, solar basically, here in the valley, or do we want to encourage electrification of cars, or is there any other products or services or programs out there that will actually contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas not just in the valley, but globally? So set aside 1%, which would roughly be about $2.5 million a year and going up over the years. The second one, which is, do we completely ignore the PCC3 type? And I don't want to completely discount it. We're going to be talking about that type again when we put the workshop together, and perhaps there will be some change of heart, or at least acknowledgement that this may not be as bad or as toxic as we led to believe it is. But for the time being, I'm setting it aside. My recommendation to you is that we, for the next 5 years, the first 2 years, we'll buy 100% of our electricity using carbon-free resources, 25% of type 1, 25% of type 2, and 50% of large hydro. Then in the third year, we'll go to only 80%. And by the way, when I say buy, I don't mean actually have a fixed cost. It could be just hedged. And sometimes hedged means that you make sure that it doesn't go above a certain ceiling or drops below a certain floor. So for the third year, we'll go to 80%, we'll hedge 80% of our resources. The fourth year, we'll go to 65, and the fifth year, we'll go to 50%. And every year, we'll go out, actually on quarterly basis, we'll go out and re-examine our forecast and lock in another purchase over in the next 5 years to kind of keep this rolling along. So we always, in the year ahead, are 100% hedged, and the year following, to the extent that our rates are flexible, then we'll go to 90% hedged, then 80%. This is pretty standard and normal process that most utilities nowadays use. You don't hedge 100% of your supply for the foreseeable future. You just do it for 1 year, then you taper it down as you go forward. What I also want to be clear about, that when I mentioned the 25, 25, and 50, that is for the first 2 years. If it happens that we go into this and for some reason some of these resources, we can't find hydro, for example, we can't fill in the 50% using large hydro, then we have to come back and talk to you about what we will need to do in order to fill whatever that gap that we couldn't fill with large hydro. If it happens 2 years from now, there will be more warming up to a PCC3 type. Then that 20% that we left open for the third year, we can fill some of it using a PCC3 type. So the locking in and the recommendation is for the first 2 years. Beyond that, we'll always come back and talk about it with you. That is my recommendation, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to field any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from the board? Yeah, Emily.
Hello. My question is, with the recommendation, with the recommended portfolio to a customer, what kind of difference in terms of billing and would they see?
If you
Would they
look-
see a reduction, for example, in their energy bill?
We have set, in the last meeting, we've set the rates to be 1% below PG&E as it will be published in 2017. So none of these, as you probably have seen, none of these scenarios have affected the rates at all. It just stayed at 1% for 2017 and 2018 at 1% below PG&E. Certainly, if the board feels that we can take some of that extra money that we have, assuming that it does materialize, and I'm certainly hoping that it will, and pass it back as a rate reduction, will definitely oblige.
Thank you.
Good. More questions? John?
When you were looking at the 1% of revenue to invest in local generation, what were you thinking? What examples?
A lot of programs that I think could be done, and one obviously is to go and build a 1 megawatt solar somewhere. It seems to be a lot of people are doing. Some of our large industrial customers down in Gilroy and Morgan Hill are already doing that. 2 of them are. And some of them may turn around and say, would you want to buy this thing that I'm building? And so we can consider it, and whatever money that we are setting aside to do programs, we could use some of that or all of it to buy these units. Personally, my preference would be that as we set this money aside, when it begins to come in, we'll be coming back here, listening to you a number of programs that we can do, including building solar here, electrification, a number of other programs that may be on the demand side that could be beneficial, and will go longer way into addressing the greenhouse gas problem than building a solar would.
When you say local, within the county?
In the service area.
Within the
So
service
county,
area.
excluding the areas that we're not serving.
And with the cost of land here for solar or whatever, it wouldn't be better to go outside the area to build the solar plant or something along those lines?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, meaning it would make sense after a while that the cost would be, we would get a greater bang for the buck if we left the area? Or is
I
there?
mean, if you tell me off the top of your head, what do you think? I'll say it's really, there's not enough space in this valley to put in solar. I think we ought to just keep it to the rooftops. It will be a demand reduction rather than a supply. If we really need to buy solar, which I'm not likely to recommend it unless we figure out a way to be able to store the energy that comes out of that solar generation, because it is creating a bit of a trouble for the people that operate the grid today. And that would be something that I would be sharing with you when we put together the workshop, just to show you what the huge buildup of solar that happened in the last 5 years have caused. And it is not something that I mean, obviously there's something positive about it because it's a renewable product, but there's also some negative impacts that happen because of that buildup of photovoltaic projects in California.
Are you saying that we should encourage solar panels on their houses? Because it's,
On the rooftops, it's a very small impact in comparison to the one that comes from building a 10 megawatt or 1 megawatt. 1 megawatt is roughly about the equivalent of 500 homes. And it will take a while for 500 homes to come to build solar on the rooftops. And it's certainly not going to have the impact that the 7,000 megawatt of solar that got built over the last 10 years is having today.
okay, thank you.
More questions?
Well,
I have 6 cards from the public, so.
Question,
I think
sorry,
we have-
question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Liz, go
Okay.
ahead.
So if I may offer along that same line, I've been doing a lot of trying to understand some of this myself, and should I be encouraging residents to do solar on their roof, and there's school districts doing solar and all of this kind of thing. And what I have been educated, and you can correct me if I'm still wrong, is that the key phrasing that Tom has been using is it's a reduction in demand. It is not a supply. And that's the big thing. And so I understand the second part, which is we need land to do solar farms. Solar farms are much more cost-effective for our agency to invest in as opposed to the residential because of the small increments. However, there's the burden of the practicality of storing the energy and finding the location of it. So we would encourage solar on the roofs to the extent possible, and we would be able to maintain the, ideally, the same programs and rebates that PG&E offers because it's funded universally, if I'm saying that correctly. So a lot of that will stay the same, and we will be doing an analysis of these options 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's how I understood we got to these 5 options and what the recommendation is about the mix. Is that close?
Do you want to address that? I mean, all the other agencies, CCs are offering what, some incremental benefit to a rooftop solar. In our operating plan, what do we foresee?
I think probably the way we're going to approach it is exactly how PG&E is approaching it today. So it will be a net metering. So if you generate something on your rooftop, it's not likely to be sufficient to meet your entire demand. You're still going to need some additional power from the grid. We encourage anything that you can do in your house to minimize, reduce your consumption down to zero. That is going to be the message. And the other thing that we would like to encourage eventually is to find ways to consume electricity during the day, sometime between 11 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's the time when solar is maximizing its generation here in California and causing some issues and problems and negative pricing for energy. And these are all technical issues, and I apologize if I'm bringing them, over here. I really wanted to push that into the workshop because when we have a little time to explain it, it will become a lot clearer to you.
We can look at duck curves and all these other negative costs for energy and so forth, yeah.
Yes.
Joe, you had comments?
Well, Mr. Bashi, are you aware of the fact that I'm the author of the two pieces of state legislation that established the renewable portfolio standard for 2010 and 2020?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay. So these bucket one and bucket two conversations are conversations that I had ad nauseum in my office during my time in the California State Senate. A couple of observations. The first, with respect to our timeline, is if we're going to have the workshop, would it be possible to have the workshop first and then move towards authorization? It seems to me we may have the cart before the horse here, because we're being asked to make some decisions that are medium term in their impact without having first had this conversation that we might have in the workshop about the relative trade-offs between and among the various different buckets or options as you've described them. So I guess the first question I would ask is, from a timing standpoint, is there some reason we can't have the workshop first and have the authorization follow once we're more fully informed about the relative trade-offs?
Yes, to some extent. In order for us to stay with the timeline, we need to go out to bid and start soliciting supplies sometimes in August, and negotiate contracts and be done with the negotiations sometimes by the end of November. It's not easy to try to bring 24 people that quickly. I was thinking maybe September timeframe. That's when everybody's back from vacation. That would be the time frame to have the workshop. The other comment that I'd like to make is, despite my views on the PCs, the recommendation is to do 25% of PCC1, which is about 20% more than what we are required to do by law, and to do 25% of PCC2, which is well beyond what we are required to do. We are required only to do a maximum of 10% of the PCC3 type, then fill in the rest, the other 15% with PCC2. So we are using 50% of both of them. Takes us well beyond what the law requires.
Well, I understand it may take us well beyond what the law requires. The question is, once we get well beyond the law, what the law requires, how do we choose as a group of elected officials who have policy responsibilities to meet the gap? And I'm suggesting that I think reaching that decision before the workshop rather than after the workshop is the cart before the horse. And I feel strongly about that, and others may disagree, and if so, so be it. But I think we're having an important conversation about where the energy comes from, and I'm sure we'll hear from the public a little bit shortly. I understood you to say that your recommendation was that 50% of the energy would come from large hydro. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
And just to be clear, so everybody's on the record about it, large hydro is not a qualifying renewable energy source in California. Is that correct?
Yes.
Nor is it in probably 30 states around the country, correct?
That I don't know of, but I'll take your word for it.
Nor is it for most purposes in federal regulation. So while we can use the term carbon-free, there are reasons, policy reasons, environmental reasons, why large hydro has not been recognized as a qualifying renewable here in California and other states around the country. Now, we may still make the decision at some point that it's better than some of the other options, which I take it is your recommendation to us. But I think it's important that we're very clear about the fact that we're talking about things that are not qualifying renewables under California state law, and that there are in fact differences between bucket one and bucket two. And that's why I was a little surprised earlier when you made the statement that all renewables were essentially equal. I think the conversation we've just had in the last 10 minutes suggests otherwise. You've made the case, for example, that large-scale, utility-scale solar is preferable to rooftop. Okay, and some would agree and some would disagree, and there are merits, and I don't have a position on that, but I think it underscores the point I was trying to make earlier in the evening when I asked the question, which is there are differences between and among the various sources, and sort of suggesting that there isn't, I think, leaves an important part of the conversation off the table. I think what you meant to say earlier, and I'm happy to let you tell us what you meant, was that for our purposes, if we get a unit of energy at the same cost, and it means that we have a unit of energy that is carbon-free and means we're not using a carbon-based source of energy, that for all intents and purposes, for our purposes, it's the same. But that's very different than saying that all renewables are created equal, which I don't believe they are.
Let me just clarify too, so I can be very clear about it. If it is our purpose and our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas, then every 1 megawatt hour that is generated by a resource that isn't carbon-based, that 1 megawatt hour creates one REC, or one renewable energy credit. And that renewable energy credit is the same, and it will reduce the greenhouse gas by the same amount because it will deter the operators from pushing up the natural gas supply by 1 megawatt hour. I mean, that's the math of it. So if it is our purpose to reduce greenhouse gas, then one renewable resource, whether it is located in Idaho or in California or any of the areas that is interconnected on the western side, to me is the same thing.
And while it is our purpose to reduce greenhouse gas, it's probably also our purpose, again, different members will have different points of view on this, to reduce greenhouse gas in a way that is most environmentally responsible. So I don't think you would suggest to us that the environmental impacts of large hydro are the same as small hydro, as the same as geothermal, are the same as rooftop solar, are the same as utility scale solar, are the same as wave action. You wouldn't suggest that, would you?
All of them have their pluses and minuses.
Okay, and I think there's the rub. All of them have their pluses and minuses. So
one impacts fish, one impacts birds. All of them have pluses and minuses.
okay, and just one last point, Mr. Chairman, and that is, I understand the statement that rooftop is a reduction in demand, not in supply, but in fact, it is an increase in supply. And again, that doesn't mean I have a point of view about rooftop versus other approaches, but it is a reduction in demand on the grid, and fair enough. And to the extent that we're a provider, it's a reduction in demand vis-a-vis our need to provide supply. But it is a clear increase in supply on a standalone basis, yes?
And I qualified it by saying, as recognized by the independent system operator, if it's anything less than 1 megawatt system, they don't see it as a supply, they see it as a demand reduction.
And CalISO is not concerned with renewables. CalISO is concerned with grid management and stability and reliability, yes?
Yes.
So when CalISO is talking about it, they're talking about it in the context of how they can make sure that the grid functions. They're not talking about it in terms of carbon reduction, which is frankly not their mission in life.
Yes.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage some discussion about whether or not we really want to take this action tonight. I understand that delay means delay, but again, I think having this conversation sort of on the quick in the middle of the summer and making the decision before the workshop is problematic. Thanks.
I'll point out that we did have a discussion about this last time. We talked about 1%, and Howard, and I think with support of the members that were there, and I know you weren't, but Howard moved that we maximize carbon-free. So I think that's what staff is specifically responding to. And I think that that had some pretty universal support. But having said that, of course, the board is free to have more discussion, and I have 6 cards after that, so.
Kind of my question is.
But maybe we could do questions, and then we'll take public comments to make sure their ideas are factored in, and then we'll bring it back up for comment.
My question feels a lot less important than Joe's, but but related. So going back to the rooftop, we keep talking about houses, but it seems to me you're missing out on the commercial and industrial roofs because, you know, I know houses are not going to be very cost effective for us. It's going to cost us a lot more to bring those in and incentivize those. So why, you know, but why haven't you could probably get almost a megawatt on a Costco, maybe 3/4 of megawatts. You're almost there. And I'm wondering, maybe you're not mentioning that because it's already been incentivized enough by PG&E that maybe there isn't a big bang out there for those. And kind of along the lines what Joe was saying is, you know, when you first said, you know, build solar locally, you know, I think it was John, I agree that it's going to be politically difficult to be taking up land to build solar in this area, but building it on rooftop, you know, big rooftops is, you know, would be a lot easier. So sort of back to my question, how come you excluded that category of rooftops?
Generally, when you build a utility size, it's a 1 megawatt, and sometimes, however large the commercial building is, the rooftop is not that large to take that large of a load. But normally, when we talk about utility size, we talk about something that we build on a land that we need to buy. Building it on somebody's rooftop requires that somebody to agree to it, and that becomes an entirely different way of looking at it. First, you have to get them to agree for us to rent the rooftop. Usually that's the way it works out. Usually they're the ones to build it, then use it to meet a portion of the load.
So if I could follow on a little bit, I feel like we're hung up on a term utility unless there's, I mean, utility you've kind of defined as size, but is there more to it? You know, when you say utility, is this a plant that PG&E or CalISO, whoever, can use to control the grid, or is it purely a size that has to do with the dollar effectiveness of it?
Both, actually. If you build it and if it's not 1 megawatt, then it doesn't count as part of your supply resources. So the ISO doesn't look at it as part of your supply because you have to have a schedule that you give to the ISO that matches your demand with your supply 24 hours a day, actually every second of every day. You have to have that. You have to submit it, and all those numbers have to be counted. And if you give them a system that is less than 1 megawatt system, they don't count that. They don't count the supply coming from that as part of your supply
But they'll
resource.
count it as a demand reduction, so we'll still match up.
Yes,
Is
you'll
there-
match up
Is there a
because demand-
disadvantage to doing it that way versus?
Well, yes, it would be counted as a demand. You're probably not going to be able to use it as part of your supply portfolio, renewable supply portfolio, but it will be counted as a demand reduction. But really, the biggest part of this issue is more the cost than anything else. The cost here is really prohibitive. It's not. We were talking about PCC1 being $15 of premium that you have to pay on the top of conventional. This one is roughly maybe over $100 if you want to build something on your own.
So maybe I'll end here, but maybe we can talk about this a little more in a workshop.
By all means.
Thanks.
More questions as opposed to comments?
Just
Daniel?
a question regarding large hydro. Where are these sources of large hydro, and is there any environmental risk to the supply? In other words, if there's a 3, 4, 5 year drought, does that environmental risk have an impact to the ability and reliability of our supply, especially considering that the proposal and recommendation here is 50%?
Yeah, this is a good question. Just remember that we are talking 50% for 2 years only. So if we see supply is dwindling, then we can make an adjustment if need to. More importantly, when you buy hydro, you buy one of two kinds of the contracts that you're going to work out. It's going to be one of two kinds of contracts. One will be a run-of-the-river contract, basically saying I'm going to buy 8% of this hydro plant, and however the water comes down and whatever amount of generation that comes out of it, that's what I'm going to get. Generally, you pay the fixed cost for that and whatever variable cost associated with the generation. Those type of contracts tend to be more of the long-term kind, 20 years, 30 years. The other type of hydro contracts are the short-term type, and these tend to be more system-based. So you buy a block, 25 megawatt on peak, 10 megawatt off peak. And you usually buy them from an entity that has a lot of hydro generation, whether that to be Power X or BPA or any of the other systems out there. And those blocks, they come in as all hydro, and if there's any adjustments that they have to do at their end, then they do that. You don't have to worry about the risk of it. Does that answer your question?
That answers a question related to, the cost, but my question is more related to if there's another drought, where are these large hydro facilities located, and will the drought impact the ability to supply, thereby increasing the overall cost of the electricity?
If it is a short-term contract, again, you fix your price and you fix the block that you're buying, then it's up to the supplier to hedge their risks. The other ones with a large system, and they usually don't sell any more than what they can sell in a drought year, or they figure out what displacement they need to do in order to be able to sell you that piece that they sold you. So the risk associated with the buy that you're making is on the supplier. But again, if you buy in run of the river, so to speak, then you are taking the risk. You are taking a piece of the hydro, and if the water comes in, it does, and you get the hydro generation. If it doesn't, then you don't get the hydro generation.
Can you maybe provide some insight as to the location of these large hydro installations?
They're all over the Northwest, scattered. There are actually quite a few here in California, in the Central Valley. They're up in Colorado. There are quite a few systems all over the place. BC Hydro use hydroelectricity to meet 80% of the load.
And is the stability of the pricing high? Is there high volatility in pricing from those sources?
It depends on what kind of contract you work out. If you work out a contract that says I'm buying at a fixed price, then that's what you get. If you work a contract that says this is going to be flexible based on the hydro generation that you get, then you're going to get that price. Then you have to figure out a different way to hedge it.
Okay, thank you.
Joe?
To this point, however, I'm remembering the energy crisis of 2001, and I'm remembering that part of the challenge, and it was only part of the challenge, was that during a very difficult time, the Northwest suffered quite a bit in terms of shortage of hydroelectric, and that was one of the aggravating problems with respect to the crisis in 2001. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, it was part of it. The larger part had to do with the kind of manipulation that was being done by certain power marketers to take advantage of the fact that people were buying electricity on the spot market 24 hours a day.
Right. Thank you.
Good. I see no more questions, so I would like to open the public hearing. I have Bruce Carney, followed by James Tulea, followed by Mike Balma. And each one of you will get 3 minutes. Welcome.
Super. Thank you very much. I'm Bruce Carney. My remarks are those of the Board of Directors of Carbon Free Mountain View, a local environmental advocacy group. We're a relatively new organization, just over 3 years old, and as you might understand from our name, Carbon Free Mountain View, we are looking to reduce greenhouse gases and carbon emissions That's our singular focus. And because that is our singular focus, we find this plan to be delightful. We think that it far exceeded our expectation, far exceeded what Peninsula Clean Energy appears to be ready to provide to the residents of San Mateo County. I want to say that when we looked at this, the first question we had was whether or not SVCE should have two products or just one. The discussion tonight has been about the default product, but we still believe that there should be a second product, 100% renewable energy product, at a higher price for those who want to have that kind of electricity. PG&E has been providing a similar 100% renewable product for a few months now, and we wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to compete head-to-head with PG&E for the customers who want that. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think that in the material presented tonight, I've seen more useful information about the costs of local solar than I have seen in any other document. Several of you have alluded to the fact that many advocates of community choice energy have a strong bias toward local solar. I believe that if they were presented with the cost differentials that you all have seen in the report, they might change their minds to some degree, but to some degree they won't, because, you know, as I think Franklin said, politics makes strange bedfellows, or perhaps someone more politely said coalitions are necessary for success in politics. But there are certainly groups who look at the local economic stimulation of local solar projects, who look at the economic justice issues. But I have to say that Carbon Free Mountain View is really a single-focused organization, and those are not our areas of focus. So we strongly support the proposal that's on the table. We look forward to its implementation. We look forward to working with you on outreach and other activities to make SVCEA as successful as an agency can possibly be. Thank you.
Thank you. James Tulea, followed by Mike Balma.
Hi, James Tulea, resident of Sunnyvale, involved in the leadership group of Sunnyvale Cool, board of Carbon Free Mountain View, and also this week was asked to lead the Climate Solutions campaign of 350 Silicon Valley, which is an affiliate of the National 350 organization. 350 Silicon Valley's Climate Solutions campaign, the two main efforts is to 100% clean energy, greenhouse gas free, carbon free, and essentially to electrify everything, electrify transportation and to electrify homes. That's how we can solve the climate crisis sooner than later. Research through Dr. Mark Jacobson of the Solutions Project and at Stanford University has shown not only that wind, water, and solar, which is another way to say carbon free, no nukes, can cover all the needs of all 50 states if it's done smartly. It includes storage, it includes efficiency, but basically it's built on the premise of what the CEO is proposing here today. That analysis from Stanford University and the Solutions Project has extended to 139 countries around the world. He has shown that Dr. Mark Jacobson has shown that answer, wind, water, and solar, which is equivalent to what we're talking about here, can meet the needs demand in 139 countries around the world. So if we can start and show leadership here in Silicon Valley, where I'm not sure where else we should be, who else is going to show leadership more than Silicon Valley to help start to show the way for not only the 50 states, but also the 139 countries around the world, how to get this started so we can get to the answer sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Balma, followed by John Scarborough.
I'm Mike Balma, a Mountain View resident and also on Carbon Free Mountain View board, as well as on the board of a nonprofit solar organization called Sunwork. And I want to support the 100% carbon-free option. That's a phenomenal choice, and I also like the combination, not using the unbundled RECs or the PCC 3. I think that's very, very intelligent, and avoiding some of the issues with that, certainly at this point. I want to comment in terms of some of the solar elements. Sometimes what gets conflated is local solar. Does that mean the solar on my roof or on a business or a utility scale megawatt that a developer owns and sells to PG&E or Silicon Valley Clean Energy? And so we just need to be clear in terms of what local solar means. And in particular, when we take a look at the stats, 18% of the residents have solar, and those are residents. And so that's a strong block of folks who want to be supportive of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And so what I heard was, with a net metering solution, we want to be equivalent to PG&E. I'm not sure that's good enough. That's not what the other CCEs have done. The other CCEs provide an additional penny a watt, kilowatt hour for the energy that gets sold back to the grid from a connection standpoint. So I think it's important to be consistent with what the other CCEs have done and to maintain those folks, the folks that have solar now, as well as in the future, with that incentive to support what's going on. The other thing is that the opt-up that Bruce talked about in terms of 100% renewable is also important, and to provide as a competitor to PG&E, but also PG&E currently does not allow solar customers to purchase that. So it's important to make sure that Silicon Valley Clean Energy does allow the solar customers to be able to do that. So it's an interesting point there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And John Scarborough, followed by Sherry Wilkowiak.
Hi, I'm John Scarborough, and as background, I'm also on the board of Carbon Free Mountain View. I've done some energy analysis out at NASA Ames in my role as the sustainability and environmental person there, or one of them. And also I'm on the Planning Commission in Mountain View. So just as background there, the only thing I'm going to be saying as a representative of any of those organizations is that Carbon Free Mountain View also supports net metering at 1% more than 1 cent more per kilowatt hour plus FIT. So that's my official thing. So personally, I like the possibility of 100% carbon-free electricity in the area so quickly and over such a much wider range than we were thinking of several years ago when we formed Carbon Free Mountain View. So that's really excellent. Personally, I prefer the highest percentage renewable at rate parity, and understanding the different buckets, and that actually if we buy RECs out in the Midwest or some coal country, then we could actually be reducing carbon more than we would here, but I prefer the more local anyway. I do have concerns on large hydro with climate change, and that, you know, this could give us a buffer, but I think it's good to, as quickly as we can, get more local renewables more quickly. Local being, you know, Western deserts, California, south part of Santa Clara County, just as local as we can get it. Storage as well, and I was thinking of the idea of actually increasing demand during the afternoon. So we have a lot of EVs relative to just about any place else in the country. We have a lot of people who are knowledgeable about electrification of things, a lot of large buildings where you could actually store the coolness or the heat that you need for the time of year. So if you could increase that, perhaps that would increase the ability to have more renewables locally. And as I understand it, we're going to be getting a lot more buildings that are built solar ready. So that could be something additionally, making rooftop solar on large facilities and residential facilities, multifamily residences, more appealing. And as another idea, for the opt-up, if that could differentiate itself from the baseline, which I think is excellent, having the baseline that's carbon-free, but having that as local solar, local renewable, that may be something that would differentiate it to a more technically savvy, hopefully more well-paid person who could afford an opt-up or would see themselves as buying that. So anyway, if we could figure out what that demographic would like and then market to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Cherie, and then Adam Stern.
Good evening, Board of Directors. I'm Cherie Wilkowiak, founder of Carbon Free Mountain View, and I just want to tell you how thrilled I am at the CEO's recommendation. to go carbon-free. I probably don't need to do this, but I just want to point out the momentous, sort of how momentous this occasion is. As far as I know, there's not a jurisdiction in the world that can say they do carbon-free. I mean, there's been places that have done it for like a month or so, but to just say we do carbon-free and that's it, that's huge. So I would support your voting for carbon-free this evening rather than waiting. It goes along with the implementation plan. The feed-in tariffs and the NEM can still be discussed later after we decide to go carbon-free. That said, I just, if it's appropriate, I would like to capture this moment by photo. And if we can do that, I would love to see a show of hands when we vote, if possible. And I hope it's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adam Stern, followed by Bruce Nagel. And if anybody else wants to speak, if you could turn in a card at this time, that'd be great.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman. I'm Adam Stern, Executive Director of Actera. We're a regional environmental group with our largest base of support in Santa Clara County. We've been in existence since the first Earth Day around 1970 and have a strong reputation for being an advocate for environmental education and strong policies. I want to applaud the staff and the CEO for their recommendation. Our Actera's view is that we want to find the fastest path to carbon-free energy, and this proposal does that. I think also the opt-up option is going to be very critical to help people who want to support renewable energy and the further development of it to participate in that way. And my last thought is that I think it's going to be in the interest of the success of this agency and the goals that you have to take advantage of the communication and outreach capabilities of the organizations that are represented here, because there's a certain authority and recognition and credibility that I think we can bring to bear in helping explain what frankly is a complicated set of issues to the average person. And the study that was presented earlier showed some of the lack of awareness of what's happening. I know that groups like Carbon Free Mountain View, Actera, 350.org can be real foot soldiers in explaining this and giving the kind of authority and confidence to people about why this is sensible, why it helps support addressing climate change. And I applaud the staff for its ambitious and aggressive approach, and I hope the board will approve these plans.
Thank you, Adam. I have one last card from Bruce Nagel. Bruce, are you here?
Right here.
Wonderful.
So thank you for allowing me to address the board on this. I think this is a great proposal, getting to 100% with wind, water, and solar. In essence, what we're doing, which is the plan that was referred to earlier about Mark Jacobson, which I think is a remarkable study, and those of you who can get a chance to look at it should. The only caution I would raise is that I think that the water part of it, hydro, is something that we need to watch on a continuous basis to ensure that A, we have enough supply that's not being competed against, and B, that we don't have a problem with drought. And I say that from experience in that 5 years ago, when I was working at Symantec, there was a significant drought in India. The monsoons came late, and people in Symantec were coming up with ways to reduce the amount of energy consumption, and they could directly measure the ROI by the amount of diesel fuel that they didn't have to buy in order to keep their generators running. So the thing we do need to watch for is there may be less of that. I think the plan is sound, it's a good one, but I think we have to keep our eye on the ball during this course of time, given what's going on with hydro. And I second all the other things that have been said here. I think this is great. It's great that we're getting to 100%, and if we can do this and incorporate it and maybe use this as a sterling example for Mark Jacobson to spread the word for what he's trying to do across the world, that'd be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Seeing no other cards, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back up here for comments or other questions. And I did have a question. My belief to one of the speakers is that Palo Alto got to 100% carbon-free electricity in about 2013, 2014. I don't know, Joe, if you know or if others know, but I believe that was the metric they chose to focus on. And I don't know if staff can comment on that. You served in Palo Alto for some time.
I did, and for a few years during my service in Palo Alto was actually 100% carbon-free. 100% of their energy was coming from WAPA, and it's a hydro project, and therefore it was carbon-free. Obviously, as they grew, things changed, and as the WAPA allocation changed, things changed a little bit, but I think they're moving back into 100% carbon-free. I just want to add one thing, and in due recognition for Director Samedi and his comment. I want to acknowledge it, and to the extent that the board tonight decide to approve of the recommendation, I would want to be sure to get the point across that while you would agree, you are agreeing for us to pursue 100% carbon-free, with the understanding that perhaps after the workshop, if you feel that there's due adjustments to be made to the setups that to the 25, 25, 50, then we will be glad to make it. It probably will be after we send an RFP, but keep in mind that RFP is not a request for bid, it's a request for proposal. So we can take whatever proposals that will come our way, and at the end of the day, we can change the final agreement that we're going to have to lock in whatever amount that the board feel after the workshop they would need to change our thinking into going to. I hope I'm making my.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And one more question then. One of the speakers referred to REX and this idea that we could trade across the Rockies. And my understanding is we really have, on the western Pacific Rim in North America, we have a grid that really is physically isolated from the rest of the country.
The grid that we have.
And the REC system is all done within that grid.
Yes.
There isn't trading that goes across the country or any of that.
Yeah.
Or help me out here with this. These are technical things that I'm sure we can cover later, but I was just interested in, briefly understanding what the geography of this system is.
The United States is divided into a number of interconnected webs, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The western area, which has California, Oregon, Washington, a number of other states, it has 8 states that are fully networked in that area and 6 states that are partially interconnected to that web.
Mm-hmm.
And it also includes 2 provinces in Canada and parts of northern Mexico. That's all the western grid. Any renewable RECs that you buy on that grid is counted, but you can't go buy a REC in New England, for example, at least that's my understanding, and count it as a renewable resource.
Nor do we have transmission all the way to.
No, it's
electrons don't flow.
Yeah, our area is
Put it another way.
interconnected. It's not interconnected to any of the other interconnection grids, if you will.
Okay. Thank you. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment on the hydro piece, and I think your plan is hydro for 2 years, and then you're going to ramp it down. Is that correct?
Well, it's we go into 80%, so if it's a 50%, it will be 50% of the 80%, which makes it a 40%, and it goes down from there, because we only asking to lock a portion of our load beyond 2018.
And so my comment is, my concern with hydro is not what people keep bringing up, that maybe we'll have a drought because your hedging plan will protect us from a problem. We might end up not having hydro, but we won't have an expensive electricity because you'll have hedged it in some way. But it's actually, some people will say that building dams for hydro do environmental damage, and if everybody starts buying hydropower, you're encouraging people to build dams. So that would be my concern. for a short term, 2 years, nobody can build a dam that quick, and it sounds like the other CCEs aren't all copying this, so I'm not too concerned, but I would be concerned if it was a long-term strategy to go too much hydro and putting this encouragement to do effectively environmental damage. So that's my comment.
Just a quick comment. I've been around the time when the Auburn Dam was a proposal that went to the legislators, and perhaps Director Samedian can attest to that. That lingered for somewhere around 20 to 30 years, never got anywhere, no matter how hard certain congressmen tried in Congress to push it through, it never did move. So I can assure you that for us to, if we find hydro available and we tap into it, it's not going to be a cause for another dam to be built anytime soon in California.
Okay. Thank you. Joe?
Thank you. I'm hoping to be able to vote for the item in a moment. I appreciate the CEO's suggestion and hope that it'll be incorporated in the motion that we reserve the right, in effect, to adjust, should that be the judgment of the board as we move through the RFP process. I think I can get a little more comfort and urge a little more comfort on the part of the board, although I may be the only uncomfortable one up here at the moment, with two clarifiers. One is the 5-year, the authorization is for contracts that do not exceed 5 years. Is that correct?
Yes, and if one of the recommendations is to pursue long-term hydro arrangement with the definite understanding that we will never be on our own going off and signing a 20-year contract for some hydro facility somewhere. We will look for available options out there, and if we find something that makes sense, we'll bring it back to you, of course.
But the acquisition, the immediate acquisition, it does not go beyond the 5-year period. Is that correct?
Yes, and just to clarify again, the approach that we will take, which is something that I was planning to share with you next month after I go through a lot of discussion with our advisors, is that the first step is to sign what's known as master agreements, and you've seen some of that probably in Palo Alto. That basically spells all the legalese to work with suppliers that you're going to work with. You generally bring them down to about 2 or 3 different suppliers, maybe more. Then you negotiate master's agreement with them with an understanding that the transaction will happen later on. And even when it does, it's not likely to happen for all 5 years because that will require certain credits that we do not have today. So most likely, even though the recommendation is calling for our ability to go out and hedge into 5 years, most likely it will not be before next year when we begin talking about the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th year.
Great. Well, I'm certainly more comfortable with my discomfort on the large hydro piece if it's only 5 years as opposed to a longer period of time. So that assurance is important, at least to me, that we look before we leap, which is in part why I'm anxious for the workshop. But with reference to the third bullet under the recommendation, which is that SVCE will pursue long-term commitment to large hydro from federal and state agencies and California water districts, there's no reason why that would delay us if we held off on that until after the workshop, is there?
You are correct. Pursuing large hydro is not something that we're going to do overnight. It takes months and months of negotiations. In fact, one of the things that the reason I've included federal is because every 10 years the WAPA opens up the process of allocating their hydro facilities, and they set aside 5% of their resources for CCAs and CCEs and people like us coming on the market. And that process is going to start to open up around the year 2020 for allocation to come in 2024. That's how long these things will take. So my point is we're going to start to look out there. We're not going to just not see large hydro as available. And to the extent that we can pursue an allocation, obviously we'll bring it back here, and that allocation may not come for years, for years to come.
I think then that if we had a motion to approve the recommendation minus the third bullet, based on what staff has just told us, that would not deter them at all from moving forward with the more immediate necessity of the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan would be 5 years, not longer, and the ability to readjust or modify, if need be, would be preserved until sometime after the workshop in any event. Is that right, Mr. Hibachi?
Yes, if you want to strike that one out, I don't think it's going to be an issue at all.
Then I'm prepared to make that as a motion at this time, if there's a second.
I'll second.
I'll second.
And I'd like to speak a little bit more to the motion.
Who seconded? For the,
That's a good sign, Mr. Chairman.
Daniel, I think you're it, as our South County,
I,
Southest County representative. Joe?
And I appreciate people's patience on this issue, but it is a big issue for this body. And the reason I asked that the third bullet be stricken, and I appreciate the accommodation on that, is I not only don't want us married to a long-term commitment at the moment, I don't want to be engaged, I don't want you dating, I don't want you, and, you know, I want to make sure that before we start thinking about that long-term path, we've talked about what all the other options really are and played those out and make sure that, and again, different members will have different points of view, and, you know, if there's a minority point of view, fine, that's why we've got all these different members up here. But the other point I wanted to make, because I want to encourage my colleagues to let this piece roll around, and it defies a little of the conventional wisdom tonight, and is this. When we start talking about large hydro, I know it feels good to be able to say carbon-free. I know that's a value many of us, myself included, hold dear. But that's different than renewable, as we have discussed. And that's an important difference. It's not just a semantic difference. The reason that we passed a 20% renewable portfolio standard in 2006 and said we're going to get to 20% by 2010, and people told us it can't be done, and the reason we passed a renewable portfolio standard in 2011 for 33% by 2020, which people said couldn't be done, and which we now see is not only doable, but really we're going to be able to go farther and faster. Yes. The reason we did that was to spur the growth in renewables by having a renewable portfolio standard on the books that applied not only to investor-owned utilities, the 3 of them, but also to municipal utilities and to community choice aggregators in the second measure, was that if we had those standards in law, then people would have to meet those standards. And that would spur the growth of renewables here in California. And that growth in renewables would give us cleaner air, would help us with our climate change objectives, would create jobs and boost the economy in California, which is why renewables was one of the few areas where we didn't see a tanking economy during the recession. It would also, frankly, help us diversify our energy portfolio in California so that we didn't have a repeat of 2001. And I would even go so far to argue it had beneficial foreign policy impacts. But that's because we didn't say, you know what, we've got some large-scale hydro out there, let's count that, and then everybody can say, we feel good, we're carbon-free. It's because we said we're actually going to require qualifying renewable energy, and by saying we're going to require qualifying renewable energy, we pushed the technology, and we're actually going to hit those goals and then some. When we say we're going to take existing hydro, because otherwise we're saying we want to see more big hydro, which is not a place I think all of us would like to go. So if we say we're going to take existing hydro, we do nothing except say, you know what, we're going to take what's already out there, we're going to use it, we're going to feel good that we can call ourselves carbon-free, but we do nothing to grow the use of renewable carbon-free energy in California, which ultimately ought to be part of our goal as well, in my view. So I appreciate people's patience with me on this subject. You can probably tell I have strongly held views about this subject. I'm pleased that we were able to get to yes and that I'm able to put the motion on the floor, and I'd ask for an aye vote.
Good. Tara?
So I'm ready for a marriage of convenience. And the whole issue of shifting out of any carbon-based is important to me, and I believe it's important to most of us. So I don't have the same strong reaction that you have against large hydro for the near term. I think that helps get us started. That gets us off the carbon direction. And I think it's been one of our goals all along, as I've read through it, that we are aiming for renewables all along. And that's where we'll be incentivizing and opting up. That was my understanding of where we were going with this, because I think ultimately renewables is where we would like to have the whatever we can get in that and incentivize it through our processes. So I'm very happy just to get to take the convenience of, yes, taking what's available now, and working towards the renewables in future, and getting us launched in a clean way. When I looked at the graphs and I saw carbon on it, I said, "Carbon? What are we doing with carbon here? Why are we looking at that?" And I understand the money part, and I appreciate that you're putting in the reserves and all the things that you put in with that, so that we can see the impact. And I am very interested in the workshop and looking at the bundled RECs versus the unbundled RECs, and what that really means, and what it incentivizes and what it doesn't incentivize. Because again, from my standpoint, we would like to move towards renewables, and so I'm happy just to get started, so that we can move forward, and with the caveat that you've put on it too, we can always change as we need to after the workshop. That works well for me. And I know that Jim Griffith, for whom I stand right now, he was supporting staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Liz?
Thank you. So trying to tie up a few loose ends, one of the things that's in our original joint powers agreement is that we will not support any project that damages the environment, that does something. And I was not supportive of this whole organization until I was comfortable that that clause was in there. And I believe we all have a tangible legal commitment that we will not, i.e. support additional large hydro and other potentially damaging projects, and that we will not support projects that the community in which they are placed does not support them. Those were very, very key criteria for me, and I think my other colleagues in Campbell. So I'm feeling okay on that point. What I'm hearing, however, is that I think we may ask staff, as they go forward in this, that they may want to do a little bit of an adjustment on the cash flow and the reserves and the residuals and all the other funds, because maybe setting the 50% bar of large hydro might be cutting it a little too close for us. We may want to have staff take a look at that. They can consider that, if my point's being clear. And then related to the motion, there are three things that I'm not sure we've got in there. One we have, which is minus bullet 3, which I support. 2, the motion does include that it's no more than a 5-year discussion, and that it is modifiable after our study session, working session. And 3, I didn't see anything on the 100% option. What am I missing that we don't have in the motion that says we need a 100% renewable option?
I think that...
Or is it renewable or greenhouse?
I was going to say, And thank you for asking. It would be carbon-free rather than renewable, and one of the things that I will just ask as a going forward issue is that we not describe our portfolio as 100% renewable if in fact we have, say, 50% of it from large hydro, which doesn't meet the
Excellent.
definition under California.
Right, but it is covered. So all these terms are so important.
Yeah, I think in terms of products that we are offering, we are offering the 100% renewable option, and we already got the first customer.
Yes, Mountain View, I know, that's what I was asking. I just don't see it in the motion.
Carbon-free?
No, it's identified as renewable, 100% renewable, renewable energy. So that is basically will allow us to buy an additional amount of renewable resources to accommodate the parties that will come in and buy into that. So even though we're 100% carbon-free and can make that claim, 100% carbon-free is not the same thing as 100% renewable. That distinction is very clear in my mind because renewable has a legal definition that we need to understand and abide by. So what I believe Mountain View did is they committed to 100% renewable, unless I'm mistaken.
So if I may clarify, then.
Without knowing the price. Thank you.
I think they put an upper limit for both.
I'm just waiting for the rest of you to join us.
Yeah.
So if I may continue, just the clarification.
Yes, please.
So renewable by this discussion means that the large hydro will not be part of that source. That's what we're talking about.
That is correct. Any hydro has to be less than 30 megawatts.
Right.
And
So that's adding to my point that we may want to change the percentages of 25, 25, and 50. That 50 may go to 45, and I think we need to be prepared because I think a lot of, for example, unfortunately you beat us to the punch, I think that a lot of cities are going to try and see if we can find support for 100% renewable. So I think that's an important aspect of this. So let's see, those were my points. So to clarify the motion, if that's what I'm looking to do, we're okay with the -3 bullet, we're okay with the 5 years, we're okay with the modifying subject to the study session, and we are okay with understanding, not necessarily as part of the motion, that the 100% renewable may alter the figures in your ultimate negotiations.
yes, a lot of things will alter the figure, by the way. Remember, we are plugging, that 100% is including potential opt-out of 15%. Now, the last couple of CCEs that came on board had a lot less opt-out, so we may see actually what we think is 100% of our load is not really, it's more like 95% of our load. So there will be plenty of adjustments yet to be done based on the opt-outs, based on the commitment to 100% renewable, and based on the outcome of any adjustments that you may feel necessary after the workshop.
Yeah. And if I may, one final point, which I also don't think it needs to be part of the motion, but just to clarify, that we are, let's see, I gotta remember how to say this. It's not going to come out right. I think we're all right. I'll let it go for the moment. Thank you.
Rob, go ahead.
So I have a question that spurred in my mind. So, you know, we're advertising with this plan, we're going to be 100% carbon free, but we're not telling what percent renewable we are. So if John comes along and he wants to buy 100% renewable, you're going to go buy more renewable for him. You're not going to reduce the amount of renewable the rest of us get. Is that correct?
Yeah, the understanding is if nobody comes in and buy 100% renewable, then the default product that you're all getting is 50% renewable, 50% large hydro, or carbon-free.
Well, what if Mountain View comes in and buys renewable? Am I getting less than 50% renewable now?
No, I'm just adjusting less of the large hydro and buying more renewable to accommodate the increase that John.
I think basically what you're saying is your base rate, the customer that takes the base rate will receive 25% PCC1, 25% PCC2, 50% large hydro, and pay a little bit less than PG&E.
Yes.
Whereas a customer that opts in for premium offerings that we have at a premium price will be buying specifically for them,
Yes.
right? So, I mean, that's maybe the other way to think about it on a customer basis. Are there other comments on this side? No?
Discussion, you're past
Discussion.
comments. We should be voting.
Okay, well, I had a couple.
Comments or?
They're comments. I think, so PCC, just for clarification, PCC 1 is 50%, PCC 1 is 100% renewable per the state standard, and PCC 2 is as well, correct?
Yes.
So that's how we get to 50% renewable. That's how the math works.
Yes.
All right. If we compare to the existing community choice entities, Sonoma Clean Power is currently offering 37% renewable, 44% large hydro. That's what, or hydro, they don't specify, but that's their base offering. We're getting to 100% carbon-free with this recommendation, and we're upping that 37 to 50%. I think that's an outstanding result. Marin Clean Energy, which has been in business the longest, their base offering, they don't talk about, best I can tell, how carbon-free they are, but they are at 50% RPS. It seems like this offering is superior, plus or minus how you feel about large hydro, I get that. And I'm all up on getting educated about this in a workshop. What are the issues with large hydro from an environmental point of view? And yes, it's hard to imagine. We've had discussion about blowing up the dam at Hetch Hetchy and releasing that water supply. That was controversial. A lot of us got engaged with that when that was a topic a couple years ago. But it really is very difficult to imagine that we would be building new large dams, and I don't believe we'd be incenting that by our action tonight. So I'm in support. And wind, the thing I would point out in the debate that we had at the Stanford Energy Summit some weeks ago, you had two proponents of building small nuclear, two Nobel laureates, including the former Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, and two advocates saying, no, we should rely on innovations in storage and other things. But the fact is that wind and solar are quite variable, right? The sun doesn't shine all the time, and when it does, sometimes there's too much energy, and we actually have to pay to get rid of it, which is an incredible thing to think about. Wind doesn't always blow. Storage at this time is still pretty expensive, and we would actually need that if we were solely reliant on that. Without the water, without the hydro, it seems to me we'd be looking at natural gas or nuclear or something. So I think that the staff recommendation on the face of it looks to me to be superior. But I think at the workshop, educating us, and maybe Joe, you can be part of that, helping us understand what the trade-offs there are going forward with large hydro would be great. But I'll leave it there.
I call for the question.
I just want to clarify the fourth point, the fourth bullet of the 1% set aside for local is part of the motion.
It is.
Okay. Thank you. Any more comments? If not, we'll vote. All in favor?
Aye. Raise your hands for Mountain View. Carbon-free Mountain View wants to see their hands high.
Okay.
Who raise the roof. There we go.
This isn't.
A candid moment.
Yeah.
We're all getting sworn.
Yeah, we're getting sworn out.
Share the pictures.
Really?
Done? Okay. All those opposed?
Want that picture too?
Abstain? Thank you very much.
Can I
That
make a
concludes
comment?
item 5. And we have.
Chair, may I
Yes.
may I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I just want to, I didn't want to say this before we did the vote, but I want to thank, first of all, staff. I think you did an excellent job, and there's a lot of thought that clearly went into this, and I really do appreciate that. And equally, I appreciate Mr. Smidian. You are calling to question some of these items, and just, for me sitting here watching the exchange, even though you were being very firm in some of your positions and all, I mean, it was clear that our CEO was not, his mind wasn't going to defending what you were saying, but trying to think through that getting us to a comfortable level here. And so I just want to say that the interaction that took place that got us to this vote, I thought was pretty phenomenal in and of itself. So thank you, Mr. Smidian. Thank you, Mr. Hibachi.
Thank you.
And everybody else who participated in that conversation.
And I would add that anybody that wants to stay for pictures after this meeting, I believe there are some photo enthusiasts that would like to memorialize this, just to make you aware, as long as we don't go too late for everybody, okay? Your bedtime. You can just take the light rail train down to... Okay, we are going to move on then to item 7.
I think this one is a little more straightforward.
Yes?
It is meant to deal with unexpected circumstances, and the proposed policy before you tonight would allow the CEO, the chair, and vice chair of the board to take a position on behalf of the authority on legislation or on regulatory matters. When an item comes up that's in between meetings, and there's a need for the authority to take some position on item before the board next meets. And what we've done here is establish a number of conditions before that could occur. And this has followed a similar action that was taken by Peninsula Clean Energy recently, and we did a little fine tuning of it, but it essentially follows some of the same ideas. And the first thing is that the matter at issue here, either as legislation or regulatory matter, must be related to the mission or operations of the authority. And most importantly, there's a need to take action before the next board meeting. And the other very important characteristic or criteria here is that the CEO must consult with either the chair or the vice chair to get concurrence on whether or not action should be taken on a matter at this in-between time. Also, there's additional criteria dealing with taking a look at what other CEEs are doing, and also what have been the past policies of this board on similar issues. Lastly, that in the event that all this criteria is met and a position is taken on behalf of the authority, it must be reported to the full board at the next meeting, so the board's informed as to the action that has been taken with respect to a piece of legislation or a regulatory item. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yes. Tara.
Are we starting a list of legislative positions for the SVCE?
To be honest, the answer is no. The one word answer is no. So far, the legislative positions that coming my way are coming through Marin. Marin have about a staff of 6 people that's dedicated to follow up on legislative and regulatory matters. And they're very active in following up on everything that goes on in there, and they continuously send us position paper or letters to sign and send back to the CPUC. And that's why we're taking this action today, because I keep getting these letters from them saying, we got an issue, this is what's going on, we need to address the PCIA, could you please send this letter to the CPUC or send it to us and we'll send it. And sometimes that has a quick turnaround of 1 or 2 days. And we got one that we had Chairman Singh sign, and for the future, any ones that we get, we'll pass it on to him first. And if he's not around, then I would go ahead and sign it and send it. But until we get some staff to help us follow up on all these legislative issues, then we are 100% reliant on Marin.
Thank you.
Emily?
So will this policy only take effect in between board meetings?
To the extent, yes.
When there is when the board doesn't have the opportunity to discuss or meet.
If we can wait, we'll wait.
That's correct.
And
That's
this
how
will-
the criteria is worded that way, to make sure this is only when there's not enough time for.
And this position will represent the board's position, not the individual's position. Is that right? On legislation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Joe?
Well, the recommendation language is brief, 2.5 lines on the staff memo, but I gather that it's the intention of staff to incorporate all of the language beginning at the bottom of the page under analysis and discussion with, for this reason, staff recommends authorizing the CEO, and then all of the bullet points, which are the enumerated conditions necessary, yes?
That is correct.
And I appreciate the fact that there's a call out for the CEO will report any action taken pursuant to this policy at the next regularly scheduled Board of Directors meeting as part of the CEO report. Is there any reason why we couldn't get email notification before the next meeting so that we knew as soon as it had happened? If you're already preparing the letter or the message to somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, the only thing I would, again, warn you about is that if that email message goes out, don't start communicating among each other and replying to that email. So to the extent there's a one-way only email, that could be done.
I understand the Brown Act sensitivities, but, then, because that leads me to my next Brown Act question, actually, which is, and to Director Lowe's comment, if we had a report of an action that was taken at the next meeting, but the item wasn't agendized, other than offered up as part of the CEO's report, then the board would not be in a position to take action either confirming or denying the position that had been reached between board meetings.
That is true. So that
Information.
at that point in time, questions could be asked about the position taken, and further direction could be given, but you couldn't actually decide to either officially confirm it or to reverse it, for that matter. So that would have to come back as an agenda item.
Is there any reason why, if it's going to be, why it couldn't be agendized for possible action so that the will of the board could be expressed if the board had the will?
Well, what could be done is there could be an action item added to the, on the agenda that just says, positions taken prior to meeting, and that could actually be listed as an agenda item, so that could actually be then discussed. So that's a little different way of doing it. Again, I think the idea we had here was that the purpose here would be for this to be informational, because the position already would have been taken.
Well,
but it could be reported as an item for possible discussion, but that would have to be shown that way on the agenda.
possible action?
Well, it could be a possible, it could be discussion and action. Yes, that's true.
Then I would like to move the recommended action with the language under analysis and discussion for this reason, and then all the way to the end of the document, with the addition of the requirement that if a position is taken, that it be shared with the board by email with, at the earliest opportunity, and that the ability of the board be preserved at the meeting when it is announced to take action or not, but to at least give the board that right. I mean, I think what we don't want to do is, well, that's the motion. Let's see if there's a second, then I'll explain.
Second.
What we don't want to do is be in a position where the director has, pursuant to all of these provisions, taken a position the day after a board meeting, a month goes by, we get a report that this has happened, and then we have to wait another month, so 2 months at the wrong time of the legislative session is a lifetime. In January and February, not so much. In August of the second year in the session, that's a long time. So that's why I think it's important that we preserve the ability of the board to weigh in. And the only other thing I would say, just as one member of the board in making the motion, is I hope that this really will be exercised sparingly. I lived through the experience of having the city of Palo Alto, where I had served as mayor, take action to oppose the 33% renewable portfolio standard with no consideration by the full council and with no advance notice or opportunity for me as the author to weigh in. That was not well received by me as an author, and it was not helpful, frankly, in advancing a policy goal that the city actually supported. I think we can expect that our exec will view these matters from the position he holds, which is as the head of a utility. But there are other considerations that all of us as elected officials will have. Some of them may be environmental, some of them may be job creation, some of them may be about driving renewable portfolio standards higher rather than addressing an immediate item. So I'm happy to make the motion and with the 2 amendments that I referenced, but I do hope it will be used sparingly.
Liz?
Along the same lines, is there any benefit to adding an additional clarification or requirement that it be brought to the executive committee, which is meeting every 2 weeks? So this committee meets the second week, pardon me, of the month, and the executive committee meets the 4th week of the month. That items be brought to the executive committee for review to the extent practical.
If you would allow it me just to make a quick comment. From a practical standpoint, there will be a time of the year where issues on the legislative front or the regulatory front will all be coming in. They all just come all at the same time. And generally, the approach that I would want to take is to look at all the issues that will be discussed in legislation or on the regulatory side, and develop positions quickly, bring it to the board, all of it, all at once, with here's the position that we need to take in support or in opposition or asking for this action or that action. And once that gets approved, then we have established at least an approach to how we're going to tackle with each one of those legislation that's been introduced, and it will be much easier then to file in additional letters or send in additional position to staff of legislators and work it that way, without having to keep coming back to the board saying, here we're taking that same position on that same issue that we already discussed with you last month. That I think from a practical standpoint, what we will try to do. But certainly we would want to get the board approval on just about every position that we want to take, if we can help it. Right now, it's just because these letters are coming my way from people who are following up on those issues day in and day out. That's why we asked to do this.
I'd like to share my own experience too. I know in Sunnyvale, Jim convinced the Sunnyvale Council to have a standing policy to support community choice energy. My council chose that same position, so I, as mayor, turned letters around in sometimes one day when we were in the midst of some of these battles. And I think, I'm convinced there are enough mechanisms here that, whoever is sitting in this chair and the CEO will earn your trust over time. So that would be my comment to you. I don't think colleagues in Sunnyvale nor in Cupertino have thought that we have abused this in practice over the last couple years, where we've been, working hard to make sure that the legislature was responding to the will of our broad community rather than special interests. Yeah, and it was, and we really did get a lot of letters, and we are, of course, reliant on, at this point, the analysis of folks who have been battling this a long time, specifically Marin Clean Energy, which had to fight off $50 million worth of fight from PG&E. Okay, anybody else? If not, let's vote.
If I could just ask one clarification, will there be an addition regarding the executive committee reporting, or are we simply going to have the reporting being done to the full board as an agenda item?
Friendly amendment, so is the amender taking it?
I'm happy to take the I think it was just a notice, not an action at the executive committee. There may have been some confusion about that. So I think suggesting that that actions be agendized as well at the executive committee meetings subsequent to an action being taken is fine, and I'm happy to incorporate that.
Got it. I was just going to point out that we have a member of the public that would like to speak on this.
Okay, well, let's take that member of the public next then. John, come on up.
I'm glad that you're looking into this because John Scarborough, Mountain View, when AB 2145 came around, we had maybe 2 months or so to respond to that. And so it was interesting, and there were some changes along the way, but it seemed like we had time. When SB 350 came along, there were some modifications in there that were very anti-CCE that were a lot quicker. And then since then, there's been some things in the CPUC that have been fairly quick.
Yes.
So as much as I'm in favor of having all of y'all elected officials weigh in on things, I think time is of the essence sometimes. So I'm glad that you're looking into that, and I would encourage you to have some set of guidelines where there could be a very quick response. Thanks.
Thank you. And I believe we have preserved that with this system. So if we're ready to vote, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? No? Okay. One no. Abstain? So that passes with 10 on a 10-1-0 vote, 11-1-0 vote with Harpootlian voting no. Okay. We're going to move on to our final item, which are reports. And I had one report I wanted to make. The last couple months, I had an opportunity to speak at the Stanford Energy Summit with Marine Clean Energy and others. I'm talking about what's going on in the regulatory environment. And I would like to report here, boy, this is almost impossible to see. Can we back up to the first slide? This is not me. So this is, but I wanted to share this information with everybody just sort of as an update on what's going on in the larger world here. So Marin Clean Energy is now expanded to include not only Marin, but Napa County and parts of Contra Costa County. They're roughly as large as we are at this time. Don Whites took an opportunity to highlight that $50 million that was spent trying to block them and against the $2.5 million that it took. So she's been, this used to be a more reserved conversation, but as of late, I think she's taking pains to emphasize this. Next slide. And they have their comparison, again, they're 50% per the RPS standard renewable versus 30 today for PG&E, and they offer 100% deep green for 1 kilowatt per hour extra, 1 cent per kilowatt hour extra. That's all it is. And that's an average on a bill of $5 per month extra. The local solar is starting soon. That will come from a brownfield quarry site in Nevada that's completing construction now. And on that bottom slide, you get some idea of where their content is coming from. So their large hydro, for example, in the light green offering is 12%. They're getting a lot from wind. And if I move on to this next slide here, nope, sorry, go back. They are measuring themselves in terms of the number of metric tons of greenhouse gases that have been eliminated over their 5-year operating period, making an equivalence to the number of cars removed from the roads for a year. And you can see that they have a variety of large projects in their backyard. So they have found land, and obviously Marin and Napa counties look quite a bit different than the cities of Silicon Valley. But I'll move on to talk about, in the next slide, San Francisco, which launched in May. They are ramping up a very, very slow period, but they have started. They've had a very low opt-out of only 1.3%. There was no explanation for why that was so particularly low. They have purchased energy from Calpine primarily for their green offering, and from Iberdrola for their super green and green alternatives, a wind project in Solano County. So that's what they've done. The final speaker on this panel was Ralph Rennie, who is Director of Real Estate and Facilities at NetApp. And so he highlighted the stats on his company, the amount of electricity they use. As a large storage company, they have a fair amount of server farms and other things. And what I would point out at the very end, without reading all these slides for you, is, and this is his direct quote, "Last week I had the opportunity to meet Tom Habashi, and I'm very encouraged with his leadership and the willingness to participate and really work with business to potentially tailor products or offering to meet business requirements." So I thought that was a great shout out, an example of a guy who happened to be on the panel that Tom had happened to talk to already, and bodes well for our ability, I think, to really sit down, understand business needs, and attract them. So I'd like to commend Tom for the shout out on this panel. It came as a surprise to me as a member of the audience, but I think it's a good start with business, which we need in the program. So thank you. That concludes my brief report. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about? If not, we stand adjourned until our August meeting. Thank you. And if anybody's willing to stick around for photographs, we can do them right up here, including members of the public, which might be fun.